You remember the Fantastic Four?
Why do people talk about the Fantastic Four like it's such an important comic? For years, on my old podcast, Wits End, I would talk about how the early Fantastic Four issues were my first comics. They made me a Jack Kirby junkie and a lifelong fan of the medium. The Fantastic Four get thrown around because this book really was the start of modern comic storytelling. It was the beginning of everything. The transcript for this essay is available on my website, witsendpod.com. Desperate times call for desperate measures, and desperation is exactly the reason Fantastic Four came to be. Before their debut, superhero comics weren't as popular as they were in their heyday in the 30s and 40s, especially post Frederick Wortham's Seduction of the Innocent, when comics were accused of turning the people who read them into brain-rotted deviants. Even after the Wortham culling, comic books survived, but didn't come out unscathed. Before it was called Marvel, the publishing company was called Timely Comics. During the Timely era in the 40s, Submariner, Human Torch, and Captain America were known for their wartime adventures. In the 50s, war stories and superhero comics lost their demand. Eventually, the company transitioned to Atlas, where it started pushing out less superhero stories and more genre tales like horror, westerns, romance, and monster comics. As the story goes, Marvel publisher, before it was called Marvel, Martin Goodman wanted a superhero team that could compete with DC's Justice League of America, which made its debut in 1960. I'm going to skip over the he said, she said parts of the story entirely because it's not important. Goodman's nephew and staffer Stanley Lieber, who would go by Stan Lee, and veteran artist Jack Kirby were put together to bring this new team to life. In 1961, the company rebranded to Marvel and released the first issue of Fantastic Four, leading to the Marvel Age of comics. Let's go back a little bit. Jack Kirby already had experience doing type characters or ensemble books. He did a book at DC in the late 50s called Challengers of the Unknown, 4 people tackling the weird events of their time that no one else would go near. In that book, there were similarities with the FF. There was Professor Haley, the brains, Rocky, the boxer, Red, the hot-headed stuntman, Ace, the pilot. Eventually, another member, June Robbins, was added, who was an engineer experienced in building giant robots. Another comic strip Kirby did during this time with artist Wallace Wood was called Sky Masters, which is fueled by real-world space exploration and Cold War paranoia. There are these little touchstones and experiences that blended together that would ultimately be refined in FF's formula. It's that with these late 50s endeavors like Sky Masters or Challengers, there isn't that extra seasoning that Fantastic Four has, even though their DNA lives on in FF. Fantastic Four is Sky Masters, Challenges of the Unknown, and all of those Atlas monster comics blended together but done very well. Despite his flaws, Stan Lee's salesmanship and copywriting added the extra oomph those stories needed. They were dramatic, encouraged engagement from their readership, and almost dared the readers to buy their stories. The Lee and Kirby collaboration clearly resonated with readers. I've talked about Kirby's 70s post-Marvel work pretty often. However, there are camps where some people prefer the 60s work to Kirby's output after, or vice versa. What started off as a team book experiment became the foundation of the Marvel Age of comics. The way Marvel's stories were produced was different than DC or other publishers, which was called the Marvel method. Other publishers would do full scripts, Lee and his co-creators/collaborators would discuss plot points, or there would be a description of the story. Kirby, Steve Ditko, or whoever was working on the story would draw the pages, basically plotting out the comic. When the pages were turned in, Lee would write dialogue, and Artie Simek, who was FF's main letterer during this time, would put the actual text, boxes, and bubbles onto the artwork. An unsung hero of this era is Stan Goldberg, who came up with a lot of the color concepts for the characters during this time, including the Fantastic Four. So those costumes looking the way they do should be credited to Goldberg. Later on, it becomes apparent that Kirby is fully steering the ship and Lee is adding in dialogue, or Lee would be leaning into the soap opera element. As people read these stories, it becomes apparent who did what based on where Lee and Kirby's individual interests lie. Like I mentioned, the early stories, especially that first issue, were a mix of everything the company had done so far. It didn't lean into a full-on superhero comic early on. The team didn't even have costumes in the first couple issues. They wore their street clothes, unstable molecules included. One of the benefits of this world is that everything feels established. When Reed Richards fires the iconic flare into the sky, the story invites curiosity, bringing an air of mystery and pushing readers to flip the next page as the team comes together. This first issue benefits from non-linear storytelling, introducing the characters and their powers, and then explaining the origin of the rocket being bombarded by cosmic rays and crash landing in the forest. The feeling of the already established world would be a common theme with other villains and side characters. It's a 10-cent pamphlet printed on cheap newsprint, but readers got their money's worth. In that one issue, we're introduced to the team, shown their powers, get their origin, and also get the introductions of Monster Isle and the debut of the first Fantastic Four villain. Mole Man's origin is one page, but it's such an effective use of it. Monster Isle gets blown up, and it kind of feels like saying goodbye to the days of monster comics, and hello to the Marvel Age. On top of the superhero elements, the early FF stories commented on social topics. Marvel would have stories about aliens like the Skrulls invading, which were an allegory for Soviet spies, but they would also do stories where an alien rampaging through New York is actually just a child looking for their parents. The Infant Terrible story is one of the highlights of the 60s and shows how Lee and Kirby would try to subvert expectations. Even the Skrulls get developed later in the series, where Kirby and Lee do Romeo and Juliet in space. So even if these stories are viewed as outdated today, they're still multifaceted when comics were kind of junky throwaway pamphlets. One of the most infamous stories features the Hate Monger, a purple hood-wearing villain who uses a hate ray to turn everyone on the planet against each other. In the end, he turns out to be none other than... It's moments like this that induce a side-eye when people mention how comics never have any social commentary, because clearly this is just dumb fun. No social commentary here at all. As the stories go on, they lean into soap opera and romance elements, bringing in that essential Stan Lee melodrama these comics are known for. It was something that set them apart from, say, the Justice League. Where those DC stories were mostly a villain appearing and being taken down by the JLA, Marvel's 60s stories leaned into human flaws and struggles like relationships or money issues, or dealing with aspects of otherness like with The Thing or X-Men. Marvel had superhero comics, but they added that element of why should we care about the person under the costume? Even though the FF were extremely rooted in science fiction, they still had money problems. Reed Richards would make income through patents or selling designs to the government. Lee and Kirby still found a way to keep their characters humbled when they were pretty far removed from normal. These stories weren't just about the costumes. The world around the characters was as lively as the main cast. Lee and Kirby paid attention to the FF's neighborhood, their fans, and detractors. Their mailman, Willie Lumpkin, would show up in some stories. Even Reed's old college roommate ended up becoming their worst enemy. Well into the run, Sue and Johnny's father is revealed. There was always some form of world building in these stories that made the characters feel like more than drawings and words on a page. The progression of these stories is also marked by the inkers who worked on Kirby's pencils. While the inker for Fantastic Four #1 was George Klein, the main inker for the early Fantastic Four issues was Dick Ayers. Ayers is known for his thick, weighty line work. Around the issue 17 to 19 range, Ayers switches it up and uses thinner lines. On his last issue, Fantastic Four #20, featuring the first appearance of Molecule Man, Ayers seems to be using the biggest brush he can find in probably the inkiest issue of the series. Inker George Bell Russos took over Fantastic Four after Ayers. Bell's style is more thin and scratchy. He's a controversial inker, and I wasn't a fan of his style when I first saw it. I still think his work looks better in black and white. One of the issues that showcases his strengths is the Hate Monger issue. The entire feel of that story is frantic, so it fits Bell's scratchy lines. Vince Colletta takes over after Bell, and Colletta, for those who don't know, has a notorious history of cutting corners. People in charge liked him because he could hit deadlines. However, hitting deadlines came at the cost of erasing figures and backgrounds from Jack Kirby's pencils. He does have some solid Kirby collaborations like In the Days of the Mob from the early 70s, but his Fantastic Four work is really hard to look at. After Colletta, Joe Sinnott, the jelly to Jack Kirby's peanut butter, joins the series with Fantastic Four #44. He stays on for the whole stretch and adds more ethos to the Lee and Kirby team. Sinnott joined when this book started going crazy. The introduction of the Inhumans, Galactus, Black Panther, all the way through Kirby's departure on the book. His sleek inking style becomes as much a part of the book as Lee and Kirby's storytelling and copywriting. Unlike the other inkers, Sinnott gets an arc. His first issue looks less refined than his last issue working over Kirby's pencils. Just as Kirby gets better, wilder, more experimental, Sinnott improves too. New readers might check out these early stories and go, I don't know about this Kirby guy. There are certain issues where Kirby rips out the brakes and does something weird. When someone runs into their first Kirby collage, that's a pause and take it in moment. These 12-cent pamphlets printed on cheap newsprint with these weird collages thrown in add to the sci-fi roots of the Fantastic Four. There are times when readers can notice the communication breakdown between Lee and Kirby. In the art of Fantastic Four number 17, Kirby has Sue saving the day by defeating Dr. Doom, but Lee writes her as a damsel. Kirby is the guy who created Big Barda. He doesn't do damsels. I'll admit, the really dated parts of these stories stem from how Sue Storm is depicted. Unfortunately for Invisible Woman fans, her character doesn't really develop too much until later. She does have some great moments later on. From the surviving Kirby pencils, his original notes can be seen in the margins to compare to what made it into some of the final stories. Even with how outlandish these characters and stories are, Lee and Kirby keep them grounded. Reed Richards would rather be building devices or traveling through dimensions, but the mundane things like paying bills or running errands drains the life out of him. He's dealing with noise complaints or elderly neighbors asking him to look for their pets. Sue Storm would knock out Dr. Doom and head to a modeling job after. I don't think any character represents what these 60s Marvel stories mean more than Ben Grimm. He's the new kind of character they were trying to depict. A multi-dimensional noble cigar-chomping monster from the Lower East Side who is kind of the heart of the whole story. He's also the character most closely associated with his co-creator.
Well, I identify with the Thing, if you must know. Despite his looks, I think he's a very heartwarming character. I try to portray him that way.
I mean, for a while, the Thing becomes the Marvel mascot well into the 70s, which I'll get to at a later time. Marvel did end up using Ben as the logo for their Merry Marvel Marching Society. These stories don't always take themselves seriously, and there's quite a bit of slapstick and bantering on top of the cosmic mumbo-jumbo. FF's first 30 or so issues are mostly world building. From issues 36 to 47, Lee and Kirby introduce the Frightful Four, which leads right into their Inhumans arc, featuring the creation of the Negative Zone. During this time, Reed and Sue get married. FF number 48 through 50 is where things start to change in this collaboration. There's a reason why the Galactus trilogy is heralded as much as it is. It was a turning point for these stories. Even though they were rooted in science fiction, the arrival of Galactus was an apocalyptic event. Kirby ripped out the brakes and floored it. The sky burst into flame, a silver figure on a surfboard warned of impending destruction. Two giant cosmic figures met in the middle of New York as people below watched.
And I had to come up with characters that were no longer stereotypes. In other words, I couldn't depend on gangsters. I had to get something new. And of course, for some reason, I went to the Bible. I came up with Galactus. And there I was in front of this tremendous figure who I knew very well because I've always felt him, and I certainly couldn't treat him in the same way that I would any ordinary mortal. And I remember in my first story, I had to back away from him to resolve that story. And of course, the Silver Surfer is the fallen angel. And when Galactus relegated him to Earth, he stayed on Earth. And that was the beginning of his adventures. And they were figures that had never before been used in comics. They were above mythic figures. And of course, they were the first gods.
The FF couldn't punch their way out of this. The Watcher, who debuted in FF number 13, would appear occasionally to warn of a major event. This is the payoff, the end of the world. Kirby and Lee would leave little hints of something big happening. With all its drama and bombast, the Galactus trilogy is an issue and a half of Galactus, and they move on from the end of the world very fast. It ends with Silver Surfer betraying his master and being trapped on Earth. There are so many subplots in these stories. With the Inhumans being trapped in the negative zone, Silver Surfer now being stuck on Earth, Black Panther would make his first appearances in the series not long after Galactus' debut. Even Galactus himself has an arc that bleeds into Thor's title. I talked about this in the Jack Kirby Fourth World essay I did, but in The Mighty Thor, Kirby planned to have the God of Thunder team up with the Purple Planet Eater to save Earth from a villain called Thermal Man. So Galactus gets an origin and becomes more humanized than Thor, but Kirby was never allowed to follow up on those plot threads. The original pages look amazing, especially with Thor and Galactus sitting around and having a conversation. Writers and artists following Kirby and Lee didn't really try to reform the Planet Eater, and it isn't until decades later that a couple of creative teams, which I'll get to, actually follow up on the Galactus seeds Kirby planted in the pages of Thor. Most people just kept him as the same kind of villain who constantly eats planets. The Galactus trilogy kind of changes everyone, the creative team and the characters. Ben now feels like he has to compete with the Silver Surfer for Alicia Masters. Reed and Sue are worried that something like this will happen again. I used to make fun of how this arc ended. Galactus vanishes and now Johnny Storm has to go to college. That's the immediate follow-up to the Planet Eater's departure in number 50. Human Torch sees the beginning of the universe and then he has to go to class like Galactus never even happened. That's the nature of these stories. The first half of this collaboration moves at breakneck speed, and the next half of this collaboration is about building on the ideas introduced or giving them longer arcs. So much of what makes the FF stand out even now is the science. All of this language like unstable molecules, the negative zone, the microverse, and countless others started in the 60s Fantastic Four comics. Kirby himself was such a voracious consumer of science fiction books and movies, and a lot of that inspiration found its way into his work. He would even do his own modern Kirby remakes of Frankenstein, The Time Machine, and The Hunchback of Notre Dame in this run. Even though Kirby and Lee were presenting new concepts, they would pull old concepts from the past into their modern day. Bill Everett's Namor made his reappearance in the pages of Fantastic Four number 4 from 1962, establishing him as an adversary of the FF and kicking off the love triangle between Reed, Sue, and Namor. Everett even worked at Marvel, inking over Kirby's pencils and some Namor stories in Tales to Astonish. It wasn't until later that he got to write and draw his character again. Later in their collaboration, Kirby and Lee brought back the original Carl Burgos Human Torch, an android who goes by the name Jim Hammond. This wasn't the only time Marvel would pull from World War II concepts. Captain America himself reappeared in Avengers number 4, with Jack Kirby and Joe Simon's The Vision from the Golden Age being retooled as an android character by Roy Thomas and John Buscema for Avengers number 57. When he was introduced in Fantastic Four number 5, Victor Von Doom was only known as a former roommate of Reed Richards who had an interest in science and sorcery. Victor's ego got the best of him, which took him down a wrong turn. His origin is that he's the son of a Romani sorceress and doctor. He had to master science and magic to come into his power. Doom wasn't just hit by cosmic rays and can now shoot lightning out of his hands. So many depictions of him water him down to a character with no real depth. He got revenge on the Latvian government that killed his parents and took over the country. Depending on the depiction, the Latvian people are kind of okay with him as a ruler. The version in the 60s is still more of a tyrant though. Sure, some of his schemes were silly, like trying to steal Blackbeard's treasure with a time machine, or switching bodies with Mr. Fantastic. He's a mix of tragedy and nobility. He mixes a massive ego, a tragic background, a bombastic personality, and his intellect. It's all these qualities and his timeless design that make people root for him, even with all of his pettiness. The more Lee and Kirby developed the character, readers learned that his encounter with Reed was a short pit stop in his overall arc. In later stories, it's revealed that Doom's experiment was his attempt to go to hell to save the soul of his mother. Even his design has a purpose, as it's rooted in Doom's Latvian culture, but also his way of covering up his disfigurement from his experiment gone wrong. Speaking of his suit, we'll talk about someone named Valeria later.
But there's one thing wrong with him. He's got a scratch on his chin. and he's frustrated. He knows he's extremely handsome. He's got the scratch on his chin. Why haven't you got a scratch on your chin? And of course, he doesn't realize that his own anger and frustration is mounting. He's not a bad guy. As you saw in a Fantastic Four, he'd give the Fantastic Four a wonderful meal before he'd kill them.
Doctor Doom doesn't take off the mask. Showing his face isn't necessary. Another thing, Doom is Romani, and this casually gets overlooked or forgotten too often. Fantastic Four number 102 from 1970 brings the end of an era. Jack Kirby puts out one last Fantastic Four story and departs Marvel for the distinguished competition. So in the later issues, he does move really quickly. Even Stan Lee doesn't feel the need to recap or use text boxes as much. While Kirby's pencils and Sinnott's inks are solid as usual, the King very clearly wants to get out of Dodge.
Why I quit it? I can't tell you. The situation demanded it. It's the only thing I can tell you. The details would bore you, but I can tell you that the situation demanded it, and I do what I have to do. I can't vacillate. I'm not an indecisive man. I do what I have to do, and you know, I did it at that time.
After Kirby left Marvel with Fantastic Four number 102, the House of Ideas needed a way to maintain the King's energy, so the 70s had a rough start. One of Marvel's most reliable artists, John Romita, took over with FF number 103 to finish up the story Kirby started. This is a random side note, but there are so many Richard Nixon appearances in this comic where only John F. Kennedy's hair made one cameo in FF number 17. Romita had to pick up Spider-Man, Fantastic Four, and Daredevil after their respective artists left. In a field like comics, which is deadline intensive, that can't be easy. There's no waiting for Kirby to come back. People had to hit deadlines, books had to be printed and distributed. Comics is still a business. With all of these books Romita picked up, he was such a trooper. His Fantastic Four work is clearly trying to emulate Kirby because that's what readers were used to. Romita's time as FF's main penciler wraps up with number 106. Luckily, Big John Buscema took over as the main FF artist for a big chunk of the 70s. There's an unpublished Fantastic Four story Kirby did that was stitched together to make FF number 108, featuring Janus the Nega Man. It features Kirby art, but the parts he didn't finish were finished by the two Johns, Romita and Buscema. Joe Sinnott inked the story. I want to mention early on, Sinnott saves this decade. Him being the main FF inker for the 70s gives it some ethos and lets it feel like the previous stories, even though Kirby wasn't around. It doesn't matter who the artist is, John Romita, John Buscema, Rich Buckler, George Perez, Keith Pollard, or John Byrne. Sinnott delivered his best each issue. After Kirby left, Lee's storytelling slows down, leading into a plot about the Thing becoming evil. That said, the Hulk vs. Thing fight in number 112 is a good time, and Buscema delivers a heavy-hitting throwdown. A rule of thumb about FF is when writers and artists run out of stories, they make Ben lose his powers, or he becomes evil. Writer Archie Goodwin steps in to script FF number 116, which shockingly shows Doctor Doom teaming up with the Four to take down a new villain named Overmind. Doom doesn't have a generous nature, he just doesn't want some random schmuck taking over the world before him. Lee left the book with number 125. When Roy Thomas takes over as writer-editor with the next issue, he and Buscema retell the team's origin as seen in FF number 1 for new readers. While a lot of the 70s doesn't introduce as many new iconic foundational ideas as the previous decade, it does remix and expand on characters and ideas produced in the 60s. A critique of this mindset can be the incestuous nature of how mainstream superhero comics never have a resolution. A dramatic event starts, things go back to normal, rinse and repeat. This is why stories during this time retread old ground, since this was the first generation of fans taking over the comics. Thomas has a habit of going back to the past and bringing back ideas. In FF number 132, he has Johnny switch his blue costume to a red one, which references the original Golden Age Carl Burgos android Human Torch. He keeps this suit for a while. One of the most important themes, if not the most important theme, is the reveal that Reed and Sue's son Franklin has powers. That would be the biggest takeaway of this decade. Early on, it's not explained what those powers are. Witch and babysitter Agatha Harkness plays a major role in the 70s. She's kind of like a deus ex machina and saves the FF often. She's the one who reveals that Franklin's powers are manifesting. The Roy Thomas written era, at least early on, feels like a Stan Lee cover band. He's really trying to lean into that Lee melodrama. Thomas at certain points breaks up Reed and Sue, and Johnny and Crystal just to drive the drama home. There are certain random characters that get a lot of page time. I believe the Fantastic Four's mustachioed landlord gets more appearances than Doctor Doom in the 70s. Agatha Harkness, who gets a surprising amount of development, has her own subplot taking place in the Witch Haven of New Salem. We're introduced to her origins and get a throwdown with the Salem 7. When a new writer like Roy Thomas, Jerry Conway, or Marv Wolfman takes over, there's a growing pains period where some of the stories feel redundant, but they each lean into their strengths and try to tell new stories. One of the criticisms I have about this decade is that there are way too many people steering the ship. Roy Thomas, Len Wein, Marv Wolfman, and a few others keep alternating between the role of writer and editor-in-chief. The different artists during this era include John Romita, John Buscema, Rich Buckler, George Perez, and Keith Pollard. Ron Wilson, one of my favorite Thing artists, does a fill-in. So does the legendary Ramona Fradon. While Romita and Buscema try to capture that Kirby energy, it's the mix of Buckler and Sinnott that fully leans into Kirby. During this time, artists like Buckler, late 60s Barry Windsor Smith, and Keith Giffen early in his career drew like Kirby clones. Smith is one of the artists who referenced Kirby's style, but developed his own. Then there's the infamous advice from cartoonist Wallace Wood, quote, "Never draw anything you can copy, never copy anything you can trace, never trace anything you can cut out and paste up." There is an artist carrying on the spirit of Jack Kirby and Steve Ditko in the 70s, but he isn't working on FF or any of the bigger titles. During this time, writer-artist Jim Starlin was working on ancillary titles like Iron Man, Captain Marvel, and Adam Warlock. It's in these stories that he would bring Thanos to life and spark a cosmic renaissance at Marvel. Starlin, at the time, was one of the few superhero artists who handled almost every aspect of his stories. In a world where Starlin was putting out his psychedelic and existentialist stories, the standard superhero tropes don't really compare. He wasn't a clone, but used Kirby and Ditko's energy to fuel his style. One of the best decisions Buckler made was hiring Perez as his assistant, who took over FF and Cape Comics in general for a period. A situation of the student outgrowing the teacher. There's a point where Keith Pollard is inked by Pablo Marcos that suddenly feels like a more grounded comic. Marcos isn't going for a Marvel House style look, and it's a welcomed change of pace. People think Wolverine and Spider-Man get shoehorned into every comic, but in the 70s, Ben Grimm was the guy. I think part of it came from people not knowing what to do with the other characters, but Aunt Petunia's favorite nephew is objectively the most well-rounded one. At least he's the one who will catch someone's eye while looking at a cover. The Thing kind of became the main character during this time. Most of the covers focused on him. Also in 1974, he got his own title, Marvel 2-in-1, featuring The Thing, where he would team up with random characters throughout the Marvel universe. These stories are really fun and can be read as one-shots. I won't talk about them too much in depth here since I'm focusing on the main FF title. This book features art by one of my favorite Thing artists, Ron Wilson. Spider-Man had a similar book that launched in the early 70s called Marvel Team Up. In the 70s, Kirby returns to Marvel and leaves again in the same decade. I've talked about his return to Marvel work often over the years, but for FF, he did a good number of covers and even worked on What If, issue 11, where the Marvel bullpen becomes the Fantastic Four. During this era, Kirby pushed to have full control over the books he worked on, so Kirby writes, draws, and edits the What If one-shot. Funny enough, he depicts Stan as Mr. Fantastic, and himself as the Thing.
Motherfucker looks just like the Thing.
It would have been better to get an actual FF story, but it's nice to see him come back and tell a story with his 70s style. If Kirby gave the 70s treatment to FF like he did with his other Marvel books at the time, it would have been crazy in the best way. There was a Silver Surfer graphic novel Kirby did with Stan Lee, but since that's not related to the main series, I won't cover it here. In 1978, Kirby left Marvel again to work in animation. He did designs and storyboards for the new Fantastic Four cartoon, which removed Johnny Storm and replaced him with Herbie the Robot. One of Kirby's first real jobs was working at Fleischer's animation studio, where he worked on Betty Boop and Popeye. So he goes back to animation because both major comics companies didn't treat him well. Luckily, Kirby had positive experiences working in animation during this time. The Silver Surfer is a character created by writer-artist Jack Kirby and scripted by writer-editor Stan Lee in the pages of Fantastic Four number 48 from December 1965, cover dated March 1966. I say scripted by Lee because it's been revealed that Kirby came up with this random surfing figure before presenting the finished pages to Lee. Sometimes Kirby and Lee would have their story meetings where Lee would give Kirby a plot, and Kirby would expand it into a full comic. Their Marvel method style of co-writing. Inker Joe Sinnott wasn't part of the plotting, but he's an irreplaceable part of FF's look during this time. While the character debuted during a pivotal creative burst during their FF collaboration, the Surfer wasn't supposed to be as big a character as he ultimately became. Silver Surfer has two origins, Kirby's version and Lee's version. Originally, during the story called the Galactus Trilogy, there was no Norrin Rad or Zen Law. Kirby's version of the Surfer was a being of cosmic energy given form by Galactus. Kirby's Surfer would learn how to become more human by interacting with the blind sculptress Alicia Masters. Luckily, the original pencils exist, so it's possible to see the margin notes versus the dialogue in the final comic. So Kirby's version is a being of cosmic energy that learned to be human and defied Galactus. Lee was instantly enamored with the character and ended up retooling him in the late 60s. By that time, Kirby was already frustrated at not getting the control and credit for his work that he deserved. Lee starting a new Silver Surfer series in 1968 with artist John Buscema was more salt in the wound. Not only that, but Lee changed the entire origin, introducing Norrin Rad, Shalabal, with Galactus taking on a new herald in exchange for sparing the planet Zen Law. Norrin Rad's name is on the same level as Blackagar Boltagon. It is true that a lot of what we know about the Silver Surfer is based on the Lee characterization. Kirby only drew the final issue of that series near the end of his time at Marvel. It had the Surfer fighting the Inhumans and plotting revenge on Earth. It feels like Kirby hitting back at Marvel and Lee for taking that character from him. I've already talked about Kirby's departure and return to Marvel in other videos. Kirby left Marvel for DC Comics in 1970, but felt unsatisfied with his treatment there and returned to Marvel again in 1975. During this time, he was writing, drawing, and editing some crazy stories. Some books with characters he co-created like Black Panther and Captain America. Others included new concepts like the Eternals, Machine Man, and Devil Dinosaur. Kirby would not only return to the Silver Surfer, he would reunite with his FF collaborators Lee and Sinnott for a Surfer graphic novel. The book shows the Surfer's first encounter with Earth, which he initially sees as a suitable planet for Galactus. It doesn't even mention the rest of the Marvel Universe. The Surfer calls himself a passenger of death, but decides to plead with Galactus to spare humanity. This defiance causes a rift between the Surfer and Galactus, as the two fight in the middle of New York. The story does show the aftermath of the fight, showing that some people watching the fight on the ground suffered burns from the power cosmic. Like in the original story, Galactus banishes the Silver Surfer to Earth. The Surfer changes his appearance to blend in, which didn't happen in the original story. Galactus has a figure similar to Desaad from Kirby's Fourth World books called the Master of Guile. Guile just exists in Galactus's mind. He's the devil on the Planet Eater's shoulder. The Master of Guile suggests that Galactus use a woman with a familiar face to seduce the surfer back to his side. This golden woman has the power to control emotions. She tries to get the surfer to abandon humanity by showing him how terrible it can be. Despite this, the surfer still feels like Earth is worth saving. Ever the idealist. It's revealed that Ardina is a clone of Shalabal created by Galactus. Even then, Ardina ends up joining the surfer to take on the Planet Eater. Galactus builds some energy machine that absorbs Ardina, leaving the surfer alone. In a quiet scene, the surfer tells Galactus that death is a better alternative than losing Ardina. Galactus makes the surfer a final offer, that he'll spare Earth if the surfer becomes his herald again. The surfer says that there was never a choice before he becomes the herald of Galactus once more. One big difference is how this story has zero references to the Marvel Universe. So, no Fantastic Four, Watcher, Alicia Masters, or even an Ultimate Nullifier. Even Lee stays away from selling or promoting other titles. This story is told as if the Silver Surfer and Galactus are Earth's first experience with the supernatural. It fits with a lot of Kirby's Marvel and DC stories in the 70s. His main characters, these extraordinary figures, would have supporting casts of normal people. The King wouldn't have his human characters be completely helpless. He gave them agency and opened them up to the crazy cosmic shit he would present in his stories. A lot of the story is the surfer learning how Earth operates. It's really grounded with random cutaways to Galactus consuming planets or wrestling with his internal demons. It's balancing the mundane here on Earth with the crazy cosmic events happening out there. Kirby is giving this book his all, and having Sinnott back for the ride makes the reunion pretty sweet. His inking work over Kirby's pencils is just as powerful as ever. The people working on this book were taking it seriously. Stan doesn't force humor or any promotion in the story. This doesn't feel like a Marvel product. It's a standalone story by Kirby and Lee. Ardina is a new character created solely for this story, created by Galactus as a way to bring the surfer back as his herald. Galactus refuses to vaporize the surfer because he's the best he is at what he does. Wait, that's another guy. Some people see him as a threat. To others, he starts becoming a celebrity. People build statues. Some people even try to kidnap him to put him on display. The ending itself feels pretty grim. The surfer, who pushed for freedom, once again sacrifices himself to become a herald to save a planet. Going back to Kirby's original interpretation of the surfer, he was supposed to be a being of energy, learning everything for the first time about being human once he meets Alicia Masters. Even in the 70s book, the first thing Kirby does is have the surfer materialize from the hand of Galactus. All of the Shalabal and Zen Law parts are from the origin Lee created in the run with John Buscema. Stan Lee and Jack Kirby were corresponding regularly during this time through letters. Aside from one reprint in 1997, the book hasn't had a new printing. A reason why this book probably hasn't been reprinted is because it's copyrighted to Stan Lee and Jack Kirby. So it's most likely something to do with paying royalties. It always is. On the back of the book, it says, quote, "Front painting by Earl Norham from a sketch by Jack Kirby," unquote. It wasn't a damn sketch, Kirby did the cover. It was decided that the painted Norham version would be the one used. Here's both of them for comparison. It's funny how during this era, Marvel would have Kirby do covers for books he didn't pencil. Now that he's doing this longer form work, someone else does the cover. According to Heritage Auctions, the original Kirby cover was inked by Mike Royer. Bruce Timm did a recreation later on as well. I do want to cover Norham real quick. During his career, he painted covers for Conan, He-Man, and even some Marvel covers like Deadly Hands of Kung Fu. So none of this is a dig at Norham, he was just hired to do a cover. During the mid to late 70s, Marvel had a deal with the Fireside Books arm of Simon & Schuster for paperback collections of older stories, with The Surfer being its first graphic novel. Or as Alan Moore puts it, big expensive comics. Norham's cover just fits in with the rest of those Fireside Books, which all had painted covers. John Romita and Bob Larkin painted most of them, with Norham doing Surfer's book. There are photos and biographies not only of Kirby and Lee, but the entire creative team at the end of the book. Inker Joe Sinnott, letterer John Costanza, and colorist Glynis Wein. Kirby's version of this story feels like his commentary on creative freedom, departing Marvel for DC but finding his freedom restricted again. only to go back to Marvel and end up feeling the same way. So it is bittersweet that the co-creators of the FF plus Sinnott reunited, all to do a book on a creation Kirby felt he lost control over. Clearly, Kirby wasn't pleased during his return to Marvel, nothing really changed, and he was again thrown under the bus, even though he was firing on all cylinders with the crazy ideas he was putting out at this time. All of this became the actual last straw that pushed him to leave mainstream comics for animation, where he was actually treated with respect. This book doesn't have a clean-cut happy ending, but neither did Kirby's time at Marvel. Kirby wouldn't be able to completely own the rights to certain creations until later in his career, but at least he got to that point even if it was late in the game. Apparently in 1976, a producer named Lee Kramer approached Marvel and Stan Lee to pitch a Silver Surfer rock opera movie. Kramer was a fan of the original FF comics. A limitation was that they couldn't use the Fantastic Four because of rights issues. It was pretty ambitious, seeing as Kramer wanted to, quote, make an epic picture on the scope of 2001: A Space Odyssey, unquote. Frank Zane, a 3-time Mr. Olympia winning bodybuilder, was cast as the Surfer, with Olivia Newton-John cast as Ardina. In 1980, Stan Lee even wrote a screenplay outline for a Silver Surfer movie. That same year, Kramer reached out to Paul McCartney asking him to produce music for the movie. Unfucking real. Based on letters, McCartney was interested, but financing for the movie didn't work out and the project was scrapped. Although, there are test images of Frank Zane as the Surfer, and Jack and Ross Kirby did meet Paul and Linda McCartney at a show in 1975 or 1976. Kirby and Lee were already talking about a possible Silver Surfer movie while working on their book in the 70s, and that's covered in some of their letters. Kirby even mentions a movie in his breakdowns. So pretty much the 1978 book is what the movie would have been like. The new decade kicks off with Herbie the Robot attacking the team in FF217. So Herbie becomes Hal, but sacrifices himself before he can cause the FF and their fanbase any more damage. No one ever talks about the Bill Sienkiewicz era of FF. It's probably because he's associated with weirder, more ancillary characters like Moon Knight or New Mutants than he is with flagship ones. Even then, his style during FF isn't what people associate with him. Sienkiewicz has teamed up with his Moon Knight writer/collaborator Doug Munch for his time on FF. So the early 80s gets a pretty consistent creative team with these two from number 219 to 231 with some random gaps. John Byrne writes and draws number 220, which retells the FF's origin for a new generation. It's a solid first issue for new FF readers. Byrne's off doing Captain America and some other projects during this time, so I'll get to him later. Some would say this is a stumbling period before the meat of the 80s, but it's a nice breather. It's a solid collaboration that focuses on the day-to-day of the FF rather than forcing massive intergalactic events. It feels more coherent than a lot of the 70s, where it felt like too many people were steering the ship. Outside of Keith Pollard, Sienkiewicz would be my favorite Mr. Fantastic artist so far. He finds creative ways to use Reed's powers, and Sue starts using constructs. These stories might not be the most notable in terms of the writing, but they were starting to mature the FF a little, focusing on the internal dynamics of the team. Munch didn't use pre-established villains as a crutch either. Both creators tried to bring something new to the world.
If I were to choose a run to do, like, that would not be my idea of the run to think of. You know, I mean, I would have loved to have been able to deal with some of the actual real we I feel like, you know what it was? It was almost like my artistic run on that was I felt like our work was we were a placeholder until John came on.
I'm going to break away and do a mini Bill Sienkiewicz essay in the middle of this FF1. These early stories are where Sienkiewicz starts experimenting towards the style he's known for. He starts off doing more of a house style in FF and Moon Knight, which evolves into the painted mixed media style he would use for New Mutants and later Elektra Assassin. The process itself from these FF issues to that mixed media style wasn't that long. It didn't even take a full decade for him to become a comic book Ralph Steadman. He's one of those artists who broke away from the mold of what superhero comics should look like, and decided to incorporate different elements, doing whatever the f he wanted to do. He might not watch this, but he should be proud of these issues. He's experimenting with his style and even trying new signatures. People rave about the Byrne run, but it's cool to see Sienkiewicz develop in these stories.
I'm John Byrne, boy genius.
John Byrne takes over from FF 232 to 295, leaving after half a decade of stories. Byrne is part of that generation of comic book fans who became creators.
My first Marvel was Fantastic Four #5. And then all the rest of the stuff. I missed Amazing Fantasy 15, but I did buy Spider-Man #1, X-Men #1, Avengers #1.
The title of number 232 is called Back to Basics, and boy, that's exactly what Byrne did. He also goes by Bjorn Hein in this issue. His run is a classic because it wasn't as clunky as the 70s, which had multiple people fighting to steer the ship like I said. It took what worked from the 60s and fleshed things out from there. Byrne starts his run like it's the first FF run ever. It starts off slow and focuses on introducing people to the characters rather than going for a big and loud approach. The first issue introduces the team and has them go up against Diablo's elementals. The issue right after that is a Human Torch crime drama, investigating a high school bully's innocence in a murder. Johnny interrogates a thug by burning off all the hair on one side of the dude's face. It ends with him taking down some Maja gangsters. Marvel couldn't say Mafia, so they changed it to Maja. During this run, Byrne starts inking himself. Early on it looks a little rushed and scratchy, but it starts looking smoother as the stories progress. Johnny gets quite a bit of coverage in Byrne's run, especially early on. A lot of the common threads are Johnny showing why he's considered a hero, and it's not because of his powers. He's dealing with the end of his relationship with Crystal, but meets a new love interest through Frankie Ray, who ends up having fire-themed powers herself and becomes a herald of Galactus. Frankie is fascinating because she's directly connected to Phineas Horton, the creator of the original Human Torch. She got her powers from an accident through some comic book bull and now can burst into flame and fly. Horton wiped her memories and hypnotized her so she would be afraid of fire. The second she remembers she has powers, she becomes pretty ecstatic. So Ray, who is kind of a throwaway character for Johnny to date, is given some relevance in the Marvel Universe. Some great Human Torch stories from this decade are 233, 238, and 285. Unless it was the issues he did in the 70s, Byrne doesn't acknowledge the 70s stories and acts like they never existed, aside from bringing back Terrax, who he co-created. Mainstream comics do this as a gimmick, but in FF 256, Byrne has the FF's costumes change colors after a trip to the negative zone. We get the appearance of the white and blue suits, which stick around for a while. I mentioned this in my 60s FF essay when I mentioned the scrapped story of Galactus becoming a good guy. The Galactus origin issue in Thor 169 shows that he's not evil, but more of a force of nature. Instead of going with Kirby's ideas, Marvel decided to keep Galactus as a villain. It isn't until the Byrne era that Galactus leans into the sympathetic direction Kirby wanted to go in. There is a part that's kind of horrific. Frankie, now fully Nova, leads Galactus to the Skrull homeworld, and we get a pretty nightmarish scene of Galactus doing what he does best. Galactus has had a lot of appearances, but none of them show how bleak his existence is, like this story. Fantastic Four 257 is poetic and haunting, and Jim Starlin's version of death makes an appearance, as it's revealed that the Planet Eater is dying. The Galactus appearances by Byrne are some of the most impactful moments for the character so far. He's humanized and actually fears death. Now, I'm not really promoting Byrne as a person. He said some weird shit over the years, like his anti-immigration views despite immigrating from England to Canada in his youth. I'm just talking about his work since it is a massive milestone in the history of the Fantastic Four. For the 60s and most of the 70s, Marvel was still trying to capture that Kirby energy. Early George Perez still hadn't hit his stride yet, and Starlin was leaning into fully psychedelic cosmic themes. Byrne, with the amount of books he was putting out, became the look of Marvel Comics in the 80s. So, Doctor Doom has been out of commission since Fantastic Four 200 from the 70s. The FF helped this guy Zorba overthrow Doom. So, Doom and Reed have their fight, Reed rips off Doom's mask, and Victor sees a bunch of reflections of his face, which I don't know, it breaks his mind. Doom isn't active from that point through the early chunks of Byrne's run. He comes back briefly for a team up with Puppet Master, but there's a running gag in issue 258 that Doom is usually a Doombot. So if he shows up in X-Men or Avengers, he's probably a Doombot. I mean, Doom dies so many times during this decade, then he'll pop up randomly like his Gene Parmesan. Byrne doesn't really reference the 70s at all outside of his character Terrax, but eventually references Zorba when Doom comes back to Latveria and tosses Zorba out of the window. The 80s is when Doom starts becoming more regal and menacing. This is where Doom starts caring for his people, but he'll also vaporize your if you try to betray him. He also takes in a kid named Christoph Werner, whose mom was killed when Victor was retaking his home. It starts getting twisted when Doom reveals that he's prepping Christoph to replace him, like brainwashing this kid into becoming the new Doom in case of Victor's death. There's a point where Doom brings back Terrax and gives him powers again. Galactus took away his Herald's powers after Terrax betrayed him. Doom and Terrax fight, but Doom gets vaporized. He actually dies. It's revealed later that his mind took over some bystander's body, but the plan happened in that Christoph had Doom's memories implanted into his brain. So this kid actually thinks he's Doom. With a lot of these comics, they try to wrap everything up before a run or a decade ends. So for example, the FF get broken up after Secret Wars, but get back together by the end of the 80s. This doesn't really happen for Doom. He gets his body and memories back, but he doesn't even face off against Christoph again until the 90s.
You're a superhero?
Yes.
Sure you are. Let me guess. That's your magic briefcase.
No, it's actually a normal briefcase.
All right, fine. Show me what you got, but it better be cool.
How's this? Hot stuff.
She-Hulk made her debut in November 1979 in Savage She-Hulk #1. As the story goes, the character was created because Marvel wanted to own the rights in case a She-Hulk showed up in the Incredible Hulk TV show. Even then, they were thinking about TV appearances and IP. Bill Bixby from the Hulk series actually reacted to her first issue.
Because there's a woman, you see, Dr. David Banner has a cousin, and she has some incurable
Kissing
disease.
cousin?
No, it's very platonic. She has a disease, and of course she's going to die, and he's the only one there, so Dr. David Banner gives her a blood transfusion.
I turn her into a Hulklet and go on a news show.
What makes She-Hulk stand out is that she's a character who loves her powers. There are stories where she tries to encourage Bruce Banner to view his powers as a gift. So, she gets her own series, hangs out with Hulk, joins the Avengers, and gets sent up to Battle World for Secret Wars. It wasn't until the end of Secret Wars that Ben decided to stay behind and She-Hulk was invited to join the team. So it wasn't even Byrne's choice, but he made the most of her character. Also, Secret Wars kinda sucks. I mean, I get the hype since it was the first big crossover Marvel did of that scale, but outside of that, especially now, it's not great. One of the biggest issues is that many of the characters don't remotely sound the same as they do in their main series. I've always said Secret Wars was the beginning of the end for superhero comics. They start marketing toys a lot and think that doing big events regularly is a good idea. It's still a problem that mainstream comics have today. This isn't to take away from anyone's enjoyment of it. I'm not the arbiter of what comics people should like, it's just a personal taste. As far as I'm concerned, 3 good things happen. Spider-Man gets his black suit, Doctor Doom becomes a god briefly, and She-Hulk joins the Fantastic Four. I haven't even read the second one, and the Hickman version feels more coherent than the original. She-Hulk first appeared in Fantastic Four in number 254 in a quick 2-page sequence where she threw some cat collar in the trash while hanging out with the Wasp. She doesn't actually join the team until issue 265. Byrne leaned into Jen's outgoing, heroic, take-no-shit attitude and kind of adopted her as one of his favorite characters. He wrote and drew her in her own series in the late 80s through the 90s after returning from DC. That's when she starts breaking the fourth wall. I won't cover it here since I'm focusing on the main FF series. Shulky joining the team gives Byrne a chance to bring back another classic FF character with Wyatt Wingfoot. Wyatt's a cool character, seeing as he's one of the few characters from a minority background without some gimmick. Wyatt's from a Native American background and got a scholarship to play football at the same college Johnny Storm went to. The two became roommates and Wyatt just started hanging out with the FF. He's helped them out a lot, fought the Black Panther, and even became a love interest for She-Hulk during Byrne's FF run. Number 269, 270, and 275 are must-read stories with She-Hulk and Wingfoot. Their relationship continues in Byrne's She-Hulk series too. Jen is such a fun character during this era in FF and the Byrne series. She's a perfect foil for Ben. Having someone who embraces her powers taking over for someone who often wishes he was normal again. She-Hulk feels like a natural inclusion.
You guys aren't superheroes. You're a family. I can't take Ben's place, and besides, it doesn't seem like he needs replacing.
What? Oh, come on, stay, please. You could replace Sue.
Johnny, I'm standing right here.
We'll talk later.
Weirdly enough, we don't know anything about Reed Richards at this point. Johnny and Sue's family is revealed in the 60s, along with some random cousins who made a single appearance. Ben has been heavily developed during his inception. Most superhero characters by this point, for the most part, have had some kind of an origin, and Reed is just there. It isn't until the late 80s that readers are introduced to another member of the Richards family tree through Reed's father, Nathaniel Richards. Nathaniel is an intergalactic time-traveling swashbuckling freedom fighter and the inventor of the first time machine in the Marvel Universe. For a while, Doom was said to be the creator of the time machine, but Nathaniel retcons that, and he plays a big role in some of the more modern FF stories. Byrne casually reveals that Reed and Nathaniel met Albert Einstein in the 50s. Byrne's version humanizes Reed, gives him a backstory and some depth. Eventually, he and Galactus become cool after Reed saves the Planet Eater's life, which upsets a lot of people. Number 262 has the trial of Reed, which shows that Galactus isn't evil, he's just a part of nature. That issue came out the same month as Alpha Flight Snowblind, that infamous issue with the white pages. Get that page rate, John Byrne. Byrne puts himself into Reed's trial as the courtroom artist. Reed and Sue decide to leave New York and move to the suburbs to raise Franklin incognito. Sue Storm, under Byrne's direction, finally becomes the most powerful member of the FF. Byrne starts leaning into more serious themes, especially for these comics. It's revealed that Sue is pregnant with another baby. In FF number 267, Sue's powers cause complications with her birth like with Franklin. Reed recruits experts in radiation like Morbius, that name is tainted now, Bruce Banner and Walter Langowski, who's Sasquatch from Alpha Flight, to help his wife, but none of them can. There's one other person left.
I'm Dr. Octopus.
Number 267 is not only a massive homage to artist Steve Ditko, but it's one of the turning points of the Fantastic Four. Even though Reed rounded all these big brains up, Sue has a miscarriage. The last page of number 267 has this black border with a single panel. It's not just a single throwaway moment. Sue's miscarriage stays with her and becomes a part of her arc. In number 269, dealing with the grief of her miscarriage, Sue destroys Reed's lab with her powers. The infamous story in number 280, where Psycho Man and Hatemonger take control of Sue and turn her into Malice, is a huge turning point for her character, and it puts Psycho Man at the top of her list. Dealing with space radiation, being underrated, relationship issues, her miscarriage, and now losing control of her body to a villain, pushes Sue to a place we've never seen her before. It's revealed how powerful Sue can be when she stops holding back. Dr. Doom and Sue have a rematch in issue 287 that gives Doom flashbacks to the time she knocked his lights out. Sue is not to be messed with in the 80s, and honestly, it took so long for FF to get there. After becoming Malice and dealing with Psycho Man, Sue decides to change her name to the Invisible Woman in Fantastic Four number 284. Ben has it kinda rough during this decade. In an attempt to cure him, Reed accidentally transforms Ben back to his original lumpy form, and he even loses Alicia to Johnny Storm after deciding not to return to Earth after Secret Wars. Thing Mania is in full effect in the 80s. 2-in-1 ends after an impressive 100 issues and gets replaced with the Thing solo series about a month later. Sinnott inks a good bit of Ron Wilson's pencils in the Thing series. That comic dives more heavily into Ben's past. The first issue dives into Ben's childhood, the Yancey Street Gang, all the way through Ben getting bombarded by cosmic rays. The Thing's main series covers the periphery of the main title. Like, Ben will be cleaning up the Baxter Building after an invasion by Annihilus from Fantastic Four 256. It isn't required to read the Thing series or Secret Wars to understand 80s FF, but it fills in the gaps for certain stories, like Reed, Ben, and Johnny getting sent to Battle World, or why She-Hulk is on the team. Meanwhile, Ben, sans rock form, is off in the cosmos with a swashbuckling side story in his series. Especially in those Rocky Grimm stories, the art is really channeling Kirby. So even though Sinnott isn't the main inker on FF again until later in the 80s, it's nice to see him still active at Marvel.
Shout out to Idaho Smith and Rocky Grimm.
In the 80s, Ben kind of embraces his rock form finally. In Fantastic Four 245, which is a pretty solid Sue Storm story, an adult Franklin changes Lumpy Ben to his true form. Ben sees his real self as the Thing until Secret Wars. Byrne is the first person to have Ben's favorite Aunt Petunia appear in a comic, and she's probably not at all what people were expecting. After his Rocky Grimm adventures, Marvel decides to bring Ben back into the FF for the book's 25th anniversary with number 296 featuring the iconic cover by Barry Windsor Smith. So Byrne leaves for DC, She-Hulk leaves the FF, and Ben comes back.
Various other things happened, and I said, you know, this whole environment has become too hostile. So I left entirely.
For a bit, the post-Byrne era feels like an abridged version of the 70s. Another awkward phase of stories told for the sake of hitting deadlines. Nothing too inventive. John Buscema returns to pencil the book, and is now inked by his brother Sal. It's cool seeing Buscema draw the book without having to make it look like Kirby. Sal Buscema's inks give the book a scratchy look. These stories would look pretty solid in black and white. Not much happens during this era except Ben having to witness Johnny and Alicia getting married in FF 300. Thing Mania continues as Sue and Reed get out of the superhero game to raise Franklin. So the end of the 80s has Ben leading his own FF team consisting of Johnny, Crystal, and Sharon Ventura, aka Miss Marvel. It serves the story because it gives Ben a chance to stop fuming about Johnny and Alicia. The two greats Keith Pollard and Joe Sinnott return as penciler and inker, with Steve Englehart taking over as scribe for the rest of the decade. Rich Buckler pencils FF for the very end of the decade too.
I mean, the FF have got the entire universe in their book with the Black Panther and the Inhumans, and, you know, I mean, they've got all this stuff. I mean, you could play in the FF playground forever if you can play with it.
Pollard comes back after almost a decade and does the Spiky Thing era. Sharon is cool because she's a wrestler turned superhero who has the hots for the Thing. While Miss Marvel and Ben are chasing after a forgettable villain in space, they get bombarded by cosmic rays, changing them both. Ben gets Spiky, and Miss Marvel becomes She-Thing. While Johnny and Alicia are married, Sharon becomes Ben's new love interest. Outside of a visual change, he's pretty happy to be the Thing by this point and serves as a guide for Sharon in her She-Thing form. I don't want to act like the end of the 80s were a complete bust. At some point, Crystal leaves, so Englehart and Pollard have random characters like Doctor Doom and Mantis join in as the fourth wheel briefly. There's not much direction in the stories themselves, and the villains aren't super memorable. However, Ben and Sharon just enjoying being Things and seeing the random fourth members is pretty fun. Dr. Doom gets a story where he confronts the Beyonder and some other cosmic beings to get his missing memories back. I loved seeing Pollard carry the FF title for more than a couple issues. Even then, his artwork in the 70s was a highlight, especially with the Pablo Marcos inks. You can't go wrong with Pollard and Sinnott together. They deliver solid work, regardless of the stories themselves. In issue number 326, someone named John Harkness takes over. It's just Englehart, by the way. But the writing gets worse and feels like someone else wrote these stories. Englehart has talked about having a hard time working on FF during his run, and how he faced editorial interference. The end of the decade isn't super remarkable in terms of events. Reed and Sue return to the FF after a crazy brief stint in the Avengers, some of which was written by future FF writer-artist Walter Simonson. The last big arc of the decade is just a bunch of dream sequences with a forgettable villain named Aaron the Watcher. By the end of the 80s, the FF are back together, plus Sharon. It's just a really clunky way of returning to the status quo. While Simonson's era starts in 1989, FF 333 is where I'll end this. Although there is a nice Simonson pinup of Classic Thing puffing a cigar at the end of that issue. I didn't mention this in the 70s essay since it was already crowded, however, Simonson's first FF appearance is drawing the cover for number 212 from 1979. Simonson's style from his FF cover to his actual run isn't much of a visual jump in the way his early Thor interiors look compared to, say, the Beta Ray Bill era when he started writing and drawing the book.
Thor kind of looks back to the past. It looks back to the mythic past, and that's where it draws its strength from. It also draws it because Stan and Jack did a lot of really wonderful things, putting the myth and science fiction together. And there was a nice conflict and tension between the science fiction on the one hand and the mythology on the other.
Writer Steve Englehart left FF, Simonson's time on Avengers was ending, so the editor at the time, Ralph Macchio, had Simonson take over the First Family. Simonson works with artist Rich Buckler for FF number 334 for a tie-in to the Acts of Vengeance event. It leans into the 60s FF slapstick a little, while the team takes on bottom-of-the-barrel villains while speaking out against the Superhuman Registration Act in DC. The real meat of this run starts in 337, where Simonson takes full control of the book.
Fantastic Four, to me, goes the other way because it has this pulp science fiction background in a sense. It looks forward to the future, and at a time when the future was hopeful by and large, kind of before maybe 2001: A Space Odyssey, where Hal can bump off an astronaut. You know, the old Asimov rules when they still applied. And I tried to reflect that in the drawing by using a lot harder edge lines, a lot of chromium, a lot of ruled straight edges I never did in Thor. Thor has all fur and wood textures and, gritty, stuff you get splinters touching. And the Fantastic Four, could slide a frictionless puck right down that stuff and it wouldn't go anywhere. It would just shoot down to the end.
His FF run moves at absolute breakneck speed. There's no room for filler. Simonson's run is kind of a sequel to his brief Avengers run, which had some time travel elements in number 296 to 297. He doesn't really focus on the mundane elements of the FF, he's pushing for big ideas and trying to explore different kinds of time travel stories. Time is the main character of this run. Some of the relationships like Reed and Sue and Ben and Sharon get some focus. From issues 337 to 342, Simonson has the FF saving the future. This feels more appropriate for the FF than the Avengers. Especially with Simonson writing and penciling these issues, he doesn't have to be limited to a house style. He has the FF journey 30 years into the future on their time sled, Rosebud 2. Each issue has something new that adds to the story. Iron Man, Thor, Death's Head, and Gladiator join briefly as the FF take on the Council of Kangs, a rogue Celestial, and Galactus himself. Simonson briefly references the Byrne run where Reed and Galactus develop an understanding after Reed saves the Planet Eater's life. He has a rogue Celestial turn Galactus into the destroyer of the universe against his will, changing him so that Galactus becomes a walking black hole so the Celestial can create a new universe in the aftermath as revenge against the Celestials who cast him out. One thing is how Simonson depicts Sharon in this run. She's a little bit more kinetic and animated than everyone else. In her rock form, her body language is like she's a manga character who escaped into an American comic. Her subplot has her grieving her humanity and dealing with being a thing. More on that later. One of the firsts we see during this run is Reed using the ultimate nullifier from the Galactus trilogy to put his friend out of misery and erase this desolate future. Simonson will do pages like this throughout his run where he's not just drawing a comic. He'll play around with the page a little. In 338, he has the team going through a black hole where it's just all black with text. It probably helped with deadlines also. Wallace Wood would be proud. 341 has the nullifier scene, which starts with a fully drawn panel as Simonson whites everything out. In this run, Simonson created an organization called the Time Variance Authority, or TVA. According to Simonson, he wanted to satirize corporations and bureaucracy. The TVA is all paperwork, meetings, and lack of upward mobility. Even though it's parodying corporate culture, the TVA is responsible for keeping the timelines in order. There are these agents called chronomonitors who are faceless people in suits. They are reminiscent of Jack Kirby's Global Peace Agency characters from his OMAC comics. Two major TVA agents have faces. One is Justice Peace, a parody of Judge Dredd. The other is Mr. Mobius, who is physically based on Marvel writer and editor Mark Grunwald. So, stopping the Celestial and Galactus saves the future, but it changes everything else. When the FF go back home, they notice a few minor changes. Also, there's a Joseph Stalin robot in there somewhere, huge guns, World War III, along with an island of dinosaurs in the modern day. The dinosaur story is relevant because Simonson found a way to turn his interests of Kirby comics, science fiction, fantasy, and dinosaurs and make them into a career. According to Simonson, he even signs his name in the shape of a brontosaurus. Here it is, number 347 to 349, one of the most infamous FF stories. Written by Simonson with pencils by Arthur Adams. Adams tends not to do interiors often unless it's a shorter project like these 3 issues or the Longshot series. This arc is a feast for the eyes, and it probably gives Simonson enough time to write and draw the issues that follow this arc, like the oversized issue 350. This Adams drawn arc is full-on commercialism, but there's a reason behind it. Marvel had their most popular characters replace the main FF for this arc. Joe Fixit Hulk, Wolverine, Spider-Man, and Danny Ketch's Ghost Rider come together to take on Skrulls and the Mole Man on Monster Isle. This still isn't the best Ghost Rider appearance in an FF story. Each character was an appropriate replacement, and they bickered constantly with each other, usually picking on Spider-Man. It could have felt hollow and insincere, but Simonson and Adams are bringing their A game. The team doesn't even overstay its welcome. They show up, realize they've been duped, and help the original team save the day. Seeing the new FF teaming up with their original analogs is just fun as hell to see. In a book that's playing with these big cosmic ideas, it's cool to see this mindless throwdown for 3 issues. Shout out to the shoehorned Frank Castle cameo. This little arc is perfect for new FF readers and it kind of stands on its own, but it captures everyone's personalities so well. The final arc has one of the most impactful Doom stories. Doom returns to Latveria and faces off against his former protege, Christoph Bernard. Guess what? It's not Dr. Doom again. The real Doom returns with a snazzy new armor, revealing that he might have been missing since the A Blind Man Shall Lead Them arc from the 60s, and that he'll occasionally pop in for certain stories. Before the end of his run, Simonson brings back the status quo. The real Doom returns to Latveria, and Ben turns back into the Thing. His reasons for doing so are endearing in that he exposes himself to cosmic rays so Sharon won't be the only Thing. Thing is, Doom cures her in exchange for her loyalty, which she refuses. Simonson brings back another element from a previous run with Spiky Thing and has him go toe-to-toe with Doom, calling back to the Kirby and Lee scene where Ben breaks Doom's hands. There's some comics that break away from the standard storytelling structure, making readers participate with the story outside of just flipping a page. Since I'm covering FF books, I'll reference titles related to the FF. In FF 252, John Byrne structures the Negative Zone story horizontally for no reason other than he can. Simonson has 2 timelines for FF 352, having the readers play along to read the story chronologically. The panels on the right have a non-linear fight with Doom and Reed. Silver Surfer number 11 by Mike Allred and Dan Slott, the Mobius issue, is structured where readers are supposed to flip the comic in every direction to read the story. All of these have the readers participating instead of passively reading. Simonson ends his run with the FF breaking away from the TVA and going back to their own timeline. This guy loves Kirby, but he brings something new and injects the FF with the kinetic energy the book desperately needed. Strap in, because the Tom DeFalco and Paul Ryan era of FF is complete lunacy. The first thing DeFalco does is drop a bombshell of a reveal that the Alicia Masters we've known since Secret Wars has been a Skrull impersonator this whole time. Ah, retcons. So yeah, Johnny marries a Skrull who replaced the love interest of his best friend. That's not even the worst thing that happens to him in this decade. Outside of the Alicia reveal, the early parts of this run are overcrowded by crossovers like with Infinity War. Alicia is saved, and now we see Thanos sitting around playing chess. They knew what they were doing with this scene. Reed is fighting some demonic version of himself, while Alicia and Puppet Master talk about her time in captivity. It's tonally jarring to have Alicia talk about a tragedy followed by scenes of Reed chewing on a fist. Even though the stories are incomprehensible sometimes, penciler Paul Ryan and inker Dan Bulanati deliver gorgeous artwork. One cool detail is how for an extended chunk of the series, DeFalco and Ryan are listed as co-plotters. Sometimes they're called the Tag Team Supreme. This run starts with number 356, but it doesn't even start getting coherent until about 374, where the FF face off against the new Fantastic Four. There's no reason for them to show up other than Wolverine ends up slicing the Thing's face, so Ben has to wear a helmet for most of the 90s. It's kind of a callback to his original costume, but it was a cosmetic change for a character who didn't really need it. A tragedy of this run follows a plot thread from the Simonson era. Now that Sharon is cured, she's working as an agent for Doom. Another example of forcing drama for the sake of it. Sharon ends up turning against Doom, so he triggers a mutation in her, causing her to become more monstrous than her she-thing form. If this was presented coherently, it could have been a tragic storyline, but it just feels like Sharon deserved better. One of the stronger plots in this run is when Reed is taken out of commission during a fight with Dr. Doom. Reed and Doom leave the title for a long time. Sue takes over the FF for the rest of the decade and even recruits Scott Lang's Ant-Man as their engineering consultant. As random of a pick as he is, Scott Lang is a pretty useful member of the team. He ends up fixing the team's time sled, which comes into play later in the run. Lang brings an everyman sensibility and some levity to the team. He and Christoph Bernard's Doom have some pretty funny interactions. Ant-Man does get one of the better redesigns in the 90s though. In the middle of this run, Jack Kirby passed away on February 6th, 1994. In issue number 388, which came out the following month, Marvel had the 90s Fantastic Four go up against the 60s characters as a send-off to the King. At the end of the issue, there's a mashup of Kirby's art with a note that says, "Thanks for the memories, Jack." It would have been nice if he got his original pages back, though. Kirby was still producing comics until the end of his life, and even teamed up with the Image Comics founders in the 90s for a book called Phantom Force. The Image guys did look out for Kirby and his wife during that time. There were the books he put out with Topps. My personal favorite is Satan 6, which Kirby himself described in 1993.
Satan 6 is a bunch of guys who are trying to get into hell. But the devil won't let them because they're not all bad. So they try to go out and do bad things, which turn out to be good.
Some of these books were stitched together from discarded Kirby concepts. I've talked about Kirby at length over the years, but the Fantastic Four wouldn't exist without him, and comics wouldn't be the same either. He deserves the credit, and it's amazing how he was still creating until the end. Criticisms aside, this run is consistent in terms of the creative team. It's DeFalco, Ryan, and Bolanati every issue without fail, except for annuals. Most of the annuals during this run feature art by Marvel veteran Herb Trimpe. He did 12 issues of an FF spin-off called FF Unlimited, written by Roy Thomas. The scripts read like the 70s were invading the 90s, and Trimpe's style changes to suit the decade. He wrote a piece in 2000 for the New York Times that sheds light on his experience starting at Marvel, discusses his firing, and what he did after. In the piece, Trimpe talks about having to compete with the new artists of the 90s and how he was getting less work. On top of that, Marvel went bankrupt in 1996. Trimpe attributes this to Marvel owner Ron Perlman, not Perlman, and critiques the constant spin-offs and new number 1 issues which alienated an already dwindling loyal readership. Another point he makes is how he observed that manga is more accessible for all ages than American comics. DeFalco and Ryan create some new characters who stick around for most, if not all, of this run. Paibok is the main villain for the first half. Eventually a new character named Hantara is introduced who becomes a major mentor figure in Franklin's story. It's revealed that Reed Richards' father Nathaniel has been busy because Hantara is Reed's half-sister. There's also another major character who might be another one of Reed's half-siblings. Changes in events happen in this run to stir up drama. Paul Ryan's artwork with Bolanati's inks stay away from the egregious 90s-isms. I mean, there are big guns, boob windows, vests, however, they tried to tone it down. The biggest complaints with this run is the non-stop drama for the sake of it and loose ends. Unlike some of the earlier stories that mix slapstick, heart, and sci-fi, the stories in this run are self-serious and lean more into a moody crisis period for the FF. There's a moment where Johnny Storm burns down Empire State University in a fight against the Skrulls. Not much comes out of it. He gets arrested, he gets a trial, Hulk makes a casual jab about it, but Johnny eventually goes free. This run does have some solid writing, it's just lost in a lot of chaos. So the criticisms aren't just to drag DeFalco. Franklin gets to come into his own. Scott Lang sets himself apart from replacement members like She-Hulk. He's smart, but not Reed Richards smart, so he's more practical and down to earth. A villain named the Dark Raider is introduced who turns out to be an alternate Reed Richards who turns villain after losing his family to Galactus. He's like a prototype of the Maker. The issue where the FF go back in time to save Reed is a highlight, as it sees bearded Reed building gadgets in a medieval setting. Sue starts leading the team after Reed's disappearance, and her leadership doesn't just end when Reed comes back. Everyone fully accepts Sue as the head of the FF, and later runs keep Sue as the leader. After Kristoff regains his memory, he gets to grow into his own character outside of Dr. Doom when he joins the FF. He's still arrogant since he was raised by Doom, but he genuinely wants to help people. The overarching villain of this run is supposed to be a key character, but the presentation is lackluster. Near the end of this run, it's revealed that the main villain, Hyperstorm, is Franklin Richards and Rachel Summers' son, Jonathan Reed Richards. He's responsible for sending Reed to another time and capturing Doom, and that's about it. His powers are to be omnipotent, or whatever the story needs him to be. A few issues after his reveal, Galactus anticlimactically absorbs Hyperstorm's energy, so problem solved. Nothing really comes out of it, and he doesn't have too much of an effect on the story. He doesn't get mentioned again, which is funny since he's a direct descendant of Reed and Sue. It doesn't have too much of an impact because Fantastic Four has a 2-issue story for the Onslaught arc where the FF and X-Men team up to save Franklin and the world from Magneto and Charles Xavier's brain baby. The original run of the FF series ends with 416. It's not really even an ending because the storyline ends in other titles. Ah, the 90s. It crosses over with the X-Men books, and there's an Onslaught aftermath story that shows the FF and Avengers jumping into some portal. Carlos Pacheco takes over for the last 2 issues, and his style is beautiful. It really modernizes the FF, and luckily he does come back to the book in the 2000s. Although the last 2 issues have all of the FF's allies and some villains showing up to take down Magneto and Xavier's mental love child. Marvel brought in Jim Lee and Rob Liefeld, 2 of the hottest artists of their time, to bump up their low sales. This is when we get into Lee's Fantastic Four era, with co-writing by Brandon Choi and inks by Scott Williams. There was some resentment with the veterans at Marvel and some readers that these artists who not only left the company came back and were handed some flagship series that replaced the originals. Goodbye Mark Waid and Ron Garney Captain America, hello Rob Liefeld. Now Heroes Reborn did lead to a boost in sales. Of course, issue 1s always get a bump, but the second volume of FF did consistently outsell the original run it replaced. Sue is basically the leader of the FF in Heroes Reborn. Like in the original comics, she designs the costumes. The suits in this version are repurposed S.H.I.E.L.D. outfits. She rips off the S.H.I.E.L.D. logo and MacGyvers the FF logo with electrical tape. The moment from FF number 1 is modernized where Sue goads Ben into flying the rocket by calling him a coward. That was actually nicely done, since Lee and Choi established that Ben has feelings for Sue even though she and Reed were together. Those remixed scenes from the original stories are a welcomed inclusion, but most of the run doesn't have those quiet world-building moments. Certain characters are close to their original counterparts, however Lee will do some crazy interpretation like his take on Super Skrull, who kind of looks like what Ultimate Green Goblin turned into. These titles feel a little more like early versions of the Ultimate line, which hadn't been created yet. Jim Lee and Scott Williams depart as penciler and inker by issue 6, Brett Booth takes over as penciler with Todd McWeeny on inks. Ron Lim does some pencils too. As much as it was supposed to be a launching point for new readers, it really does require knowledge of the previous relationships for them to have any impact. For example, Human Torch meets the Inhumans in issue 8 and immediately becomes close with Crystal by issue 9. The next time they're seen together is in issue 12 while Galactus is trying to consume Earth. Everyone randomly shows up, they fight Mole Man and Namor on the same day, Black Panther joins the FF in the fight against Dr. Doom where they immediately introduce Silver Surfer, Galactus, and every other Herald. Even though these stories sold well, there really wasn't anywhere for them to go. There was no longevity. The Fantastic Four got their powers, met most of their supporting cast, and fought Galactus in the span of what feels like a week. The original run had moments of quiet that let the world blossom. While the issues sold well, the line ended and the stories returned to their status quo. Each title had 13 issues, but those issue 13s were part of a Marvel Wildstorm crossover called World War III. The most relevant part of Heroes Reborn Fantastic Four number 13 is that it's written by James Robinson with art by Mike Wieringo, both future FF creators. So Jim Lee is out, Chris Claremont takes over. This does not feel like the Claremont of old. The artist for his run is Salvador Larroca, who took over from Alan Davis. One of the notable parts of this run is seeing Larroca's more animated 90s style before he started going for a photo-referenced look. When Claremont takes over the book, he starts bringing in a lot of his favorite characters, connecting the FF to the X-Men, Captain Britain, and bringing in random plot points that have very little payoff. It demands familiarity of Claremont's work. While it's accessible, it quickly devolves into a Claremont fest. One major change is the FF moving from 4 Freedoms Plaza, which got blown up, to Pier 4, their most humble abode. Claremont's run ends very early in the 2000s and leaves a lot of loose ends. However, even though he forces a lot of his own plot points, he doesn't discard everything from previous runs either. There are issues where replacement members like Luke Cage and She-Hulk appear. He even acknowledges the friendship between Mole Man and the Thing. Even though his run is loud and crowded, Claremont doesn't step on everything that came before. His use of the previous material is usually stronger than the plot points he created. Claremont's run really starts picking up by issue 15, where Valeria, Reed and Sue's daughter, is introduced. There was a Marvel What If issue that features a daughter named Susie, skipping over Byrne's story. This Valeria is from an alternate future where Sue and Doctor Doom have a family. There is a reveal that Heroes Reborn is a universe created by Franklin while waiting for his family to come back after they vanished in the original run. Issue 26 is the last issue of the 90s, so that's where I'll leave it. Claremont departs the book not long after this. In 1994, there was an unreleased FF movie produced by Roger Corman on a $1 million budget. It's not the best written movie, and the special effects are limited by the budget. Yet, it's obvious that the director, Ole Sasson, the cast, and crew actually cared about doing the story justice. Also, this is the most comic-accurate Doctor Doom that's been in a movie so far. I mean, the costume is spot on. The actual performance does Doom justice, monologues and maniacal laughter included. It could use some ADR, but they got Doom right the first time.
Goodbye, Dr. Richards. You may call me Dr. Doom.
The Thing's suit was made practically with an animatronic head. Even though it's corny, it captures the spirit of the original comics pretty well without changing too much of it. Minus replacing the Mole Man with some not-so-great character named the Jeweler, he's terrible. Cheesiness aside, they got FF right the first time. It's much better than these projects.
Enter the psychedelic tunnel of light to the fourth dimension in Doctor Strange. Stanley Kubrick might have pioneered this effect in 2001: A Space Odyssey.
Be Captain America, Steve.
What? Would you please pull over the car? I am going to get sick.
Oh, okay, all right.
Hey! Captain! Are you okay? Yeah. Hold it! No, wait! Don't leave me out here!
Even though those projects were limited by the budget and what special effects could do, they all did something that the FF movie didn't do. They were ashamed of the source material. So many of those early comic, TV, and movie projects were ashamed of being based on comics and changed the stories for the worse. Then, there are the ones that did whatever they wanted, which kind of made them better.
On my way back to the garage. Where you want to go to? Hey, man, I don't want to mess with you.
Open the door, would you please? I'm not feeling well.
I'm not feeling so well myself. Excuse me, I'm in a hurry.
The 1994 movie is just so sincerely the Fantastic Four. Sassoon and company had limited resources and still told a story with the hallmarks of FF, breaking down the characters, showing them being bombarded by cosmic rays and crash landing before their powers manifest. Ben Grimm and Alicia's relationship is covered, and for once, the FF fight an accurate Doctor Doom in a castle, where they go into Reed and Victor's backstory.
Well, what do you think?
You look
Like a dork.
magnificent.
Thank you. I have one for you. And here's yours. It's flame retardant.
What's with the suits?
We are the Fantastic Four, remember?
It's clobber time.
Play more!
I'm going to enjoy killing you. Very much.
That's for trying to kill me.
The movie was never officially released. It wasn't even supposed to be seen. The company Constantine Films only made the movie cheaply to keep the rights from going back to Marvel. The people who worked on the project didn't know this and thought it was a sure thing. However, people were able to get their hands on the original film and make bootlegs. Best case scenario, a solid first outing for an FF movie. Worst case, it's still an entertaining watch and we'll get a laugh or two.
Behind you. Are you okay?
I just lay him on.
What stands out with this project is the people making it actually cared. For those who can seek it out, I recommend the Doom documentary, which breaks down the whole process of the first Fantastic Four movie. Even the story about the guy who did the visual effects and why they look so rushed is crazy. So that documentary is worth a look. After writer Chris Claremont departs the series, Carlos Pacheco returns to write and draw the book. His involvement feels like a soft reboot for the series, making it more welcoming for newer readers. It blends the cosmic exploration and mundane family elements pretty well, and throws out the excess of the last run. Classic 60s FF and the John Byrne era are clear influences in these stories. I loved Pacheco's 2 issues of the original FF run. He shows up and clotheslines readers and the series with this modern, fluid, dynamic look that broke away from FF's house style and even redesigns the costumes. From the first page, Pacheco and his co-writer Rafael Marin seem to get the FF. This run has pretty much an all-Spanish creative team with Pacheco, Marin, and inker Jesus Marino. One strength of this run is how it takes a forgettable villain like Diablo and makes him into a credible threat. Also, this man says Orgy of Destruction, which is one of the most creative threats from an FF villain. The first arc delves into Diablo's origin, showing him being hunted through Spain over time for his tyranny and practice of alchemy. He's able to subdue the entire FF, but gets taken down by his own hubris. Also, as far as I know, this is the run where Ben stopped smoking cigars. We find out about an organization called the Gideon Trust. Gideon is a deep cut to an FF villain from the 60s. This group wanted to buy out Pier 4 so they could get access to the FF's Negative Zone portal. They want to mine the Negative Zone for profit! A new character is introduced with Noah Baxter, who built the original Baxter Building. He's one of Reed's mentors, and even hooks the FF up with a brand new Baxter Building that he built in space. In Fantastic Four 38, writer Jeff Loeb joins the book. The run still uses Pacheco and Marin's plots and scripts, however, Loeb is adding the dialogue. I can't say what exact role Loeb had outside of that, since there were subplots before his involvement still in effect, like the Gideon Trust. Some of Pacheco and Marine's scripts are available to see the differences in the final product. Okay, I never thought they would do it. In this run, Pacheco brings back one of the most terrifying Fantastic Four villains, one even more terrifying than Doctor Doom and Galactus. Paste Pot Pete. He's hired by the Gideon Trust to go after the FF and mine the negative zone for resources. It's not even played for laughs, and Pete gets his licks in against the FF. When Ben, Sue, and Reed are trapped in the negative zone with some cosmic pirates, Johnny forms his own FF with She-Hulk, Namorita, and Scott Lang's Ant-Man. A multiverse arc ends with Franklin losing his powers and future Valyria being erased. Issue 49 ends with Sue being pregnant again, where Franklin used the last of his reality-bending powers to give Sue Valyria back. The explanation is so convoluted, I'll just leave this panel up for a second. Fantastic Four aficionado Carl Kiesel takes over dialoguing Pacheco and Marine's plots with issue 51, with Mark Bagley on pencils. Kiesel and Alvey do inks. This run ends with one of FF's most diabolical issues, featuring Johnny enlisting Doctor Doom to help Sue deliver her baby, while Reed is being held prisoner by some rogue Inhumans. In return, Doom gets to name her Valyria after the woman he loved. This is arguably the run I recommended the most to get people into the Fantastic Four. This isn't just the Mark Waid run, it's Waid, Mike Wieringo, and Carl Kiesel's run. Wieringo's art style is so fluid. He modernizes the world with a clean style that has a lot of heart and emotion, making the characters move on the page. There are 3 artists that come to mind when I think of Ben Grimm. The King, of course, Ron Wilson, and Mike Wieringo. For characters that have been around for a while, there are certain artists who can tap into what makes that character tick and cement the new look for the era they're working in. Kiesel's inks are so instrumental to this run that if Wieringo is inked by someone else, it's noticeable, which is not a criticism of other inkers. It's just to show how well Waid, Wieringo, and Kiesel gel together in this book.
An inker, like a cinematographer, a good cinematographer, helps enhance the vision of the person he's working with. So a good inker will enhance the vision of the penciler he's working with, and hopefully, not work against that vision.
Waid writes like this is the first run of FF ever. It doesn't fall into egregious callback territory, doesn't require any homework. Right from the first issue, it shows why the FF are as impactful as they are.
Reed's big secret is that the reason they wear these outlandish costumes, the reason they have these names like Mr. Fantastic or the Invisible Woman, the reason they're in the middle of Manhattan in the Baxter Building rather than in a cave somewhere, the reason that they're merchandised and the reason they're celebrities is because Reed created that machine. And he didn't do it out of any sort of ego. He did it out of the sense of, I've taken these guys up in my rocket ship and I've ruined their lives. I've made them freaks. I've made them the kind of people who the government will pull them apart and they will live the rest of their lives as science experiments unless I do something to give them purpose, to give them a reason to get up in the morning. So he created this giant machine of celebrity around them, and it has the illusion of, oh, the FF, don't they think they're great? They've got the big marketing giants behind them. They got the action figures and stuff. But the reality of it is Reed trying to give them something that resembles a normal life.
This run is so heavily focused on the relationships between the FF that it doesn't force big events and there aren't too many new characters shoehorned in. It's working with these 4 core elements and trying to tell a heartwarming story. Sue tasks Johnny with running Fantastic Four Incorporated so he can grow up a little. This run has the infamous moment where Doctor Doom turns Valyria, the woman he loved, into an armor and proceeds to send Franklin to hell. This version is out for blood and doesn't care who is in his way. It's a departure from the regal Doom from past stories. There's a point where Doom captures the FF, leaving Reed on his own. The only way to save them, with Doctor Strange's help, is for Reed to accept his limitations and ditch science for magic. With comics like this, I don't want to break down every single moment. I usually say how I prefer people going out and checking out the actual books and developing an opinion themselves. And yeah, these comics have been around for a long time, but not everyone has read them. There are moments when the Fantastic Four meet God that are better experienced firsthand because it's done so wholeheartedly. The run ends quietly with the FF showing Galactus the benefits of humanity while embracing their powers and role as Imaginauts. Each character has such a distinct voice and personality, and this run shows that the FF are a package deal. Each one of them brings something to the table that contributes to why the label World's Greatest Comic Magazine still resonates. Carl Kiesel takes over writing duties after Waid for issues 252 to 256. He shows up for these brief but thoughtful stories that understand the core of these characters, short and sweet with a lot of impact. J. Michael Straczynski takes over writing and is paired with artist Mike McKone, with Andy Lanning on inks for Fantastic Four number 527 to 541. The JMS McKone Lanning run isn't the best starting point, but is a pretty solid follow-up to the Waid era. While the previous run balanced out all the characters, this is the most Reed Richards heavy run so far. He's almost the main character. It explores the character as a family man, a leader, a scientist. This is someone whose brain has no limits, but he's still grounded and wants to help as many people as he can. It's unfortunate how this Reed character study had the Civil War event shoehorned into it. McKone balances the quiet moments and cosmic action insanely well. Ben has a subplot where he comes into money with more zeros than even Reed can count, so he's off actually having a good time for once. This run connects directly to the Waid run and brings Doom back in the most casually vengeful way. McKone and Lanning's pencils and inks make the Doom scenes memorable, even though he doesn't have many appearances. The most impactful moment of this run focuses on how Reed and this cosmic being called the Entity go back to the very beginning of everything, as JMS tweaks the origin so that Reed is partially responsible for the Big Bang and bombarding the Fantastic Four with cosmic rays. Stories like this show how Reed is so instrumental in the biggest parts of Marvel's storytelling. The fact that he's willing to understand everything but is still grounded and helps people is what separates him from villains like Doom, Mad Thinker, or the Wizard. Outside of the Civil War tie-ins and the fact that the run is unfinished, Straczynski clearly cares about the characters and shows a lot of reverence towards Reed. He had to work around an event instead of focusing on his character-focused story. This is a guy who's a massive Jack Kirby fan and even interviewed the King in the 90s. It's the quiet character-building moments that showcase the FF's humanity that make the high points of this run. I won't cover Civil War in depth, but did want to cover how this event broke up the FF and changed Reed's character for the worse. In Civil War, Reed sides with Tony Stark's pro-registration group and helps round up heroes, basically becoming a prison warden, which causes Sue and Ben to leave while Johnny is in a coma. The tonal shift of the JMS run is so jarring when it's forced to cross over with Civil War in the last few issues. Not once, but twice, Reed has spoken with the government in the past about his support of superheroes, which goes against his Civil War role. Back in Walter Simonson's run, the FF spoke out against another Superhuman Registration Act, similar to the one in Civil War. Reed just isn't a character who would build a negative zone prison to lock up heroes. The second instance happens in issue 52 of the Pacheco run, where he speaks up in support of the Inhumans, Thor, Silver Surfer, and other superhuman beings who are threatened with deportation from Earth. JMS has spoken up over the years that he wasn't a fan of how Reed was depicted in the event. It's that he couldn't change the direction because it's how the character was written for Civil War. I'm really excited to talk about Dwayne McDuffie's work again. This is a short run, but a nice change of pace from Civil War and a breather before the next run. In his first two issues, McDuffie writes a conversation between Johnny and Reed, showing why Reed's characterization in Civil War didn't work. While this whole run doesn't focus on Civil War, McDuffie does use it to do some damage control for Reed and the FF. He has Reed and Sue go on vacation, replacing them with Black Panther and Storm. McDuffie's art collaborator for this run, Paul Pelletier, joins the series with issue 544. Reed's Room of 100 Ideas makes an appearance in Civil War, but McDuffie and Pelletier show Reed tinkering in there often during their run. The run ends with the current FF going up against their future selves, where Reed reveals to his past self that he's going to solve everything and achieve world peace through his 101st idea. Future Doom also comes back and they send him to a reality without Reed's. While this run doesn't get too much coverage, it does plant some major seeds that are used in the often discussed Hickman run. No hate to Hickman at all, his run is incredible, but he gets credit for certain things he didn't do. Jack Kirby, John Byrne, and Dwayne McDuffie are the ones who show that Reed solved everything. Hickman is the one who explores how Reed gets there. It's not stated in the comic, but this all ties back to the first appearances of Rama Tut and Nathaniel Richards talking about how Reed is responsible for peace that lasts far into the future. So Dwayne McDuffie and Paul Pelletier's run ends with issue 553, which is also the last FF cover Michael Turner would produce. Number 553 came out in January 2008, with a March 2008 cover date. Turner would pass away too soon in June of that year after battling cancer. McDuffie is so good at pulling all these niche plot points from older stories, but incorporating them in a way that doesn't force readers to have a doctorate in comics. It isn't intimidating for newer readers, but is rewarding for those familiar with the nitty-gritty. Writer Mark Millar and artist Brian Hitch take over with the summer blockbuster take on FF. One of the biggest plot points of this run is that Reed's ex from the Claremont run returns. She tells Reed that she and her husband are working on a new Earth in case this one is destroyed. Later, she finds out that it's really just an escape plan for Earth's rich people while everyone else gets left behind. The other big subplot is a group called the New Defenders led by Hulk's son. Millar connects this story to his Old Man Logan arc, having Hulk Jr. be a descendant of the Hulk gang. It turns out the real New Defenders leader is Sue Storm from the future, who brought her team back in time using Galactus as a time machine to find a new home because the old one was destroyed. Millar sends this team to New Earth after they casually kidnap and torture Johnny and Doom and fry Galactus. Valeria gets a pretty big role in this run. We see her Reed-level intelligence manifesting, where she wasn't able to speak in previous runs. It causes some drama between her and Franklin, who lost his powers during Pacheco's run. One cool design aspect is that in Fantastic Four 563, the story summary page gets turned into Valeria's blog, so she's the one summarizing the story up to this point. Arguably, the most important parts of this run are the scenes where Hitch and Millar focus on developing Franklin and Valeria and making their personalities distinct from each other. Where Franklin has a boundless imagination and Valeria is focused on the science of the real world, like Reed. The four main books of this line in order are Ultimate Spider-Man, Ultimate X-Men, The Ultimates, with Fantastic Four debuting 4 years into the Ultimate imprint. Millar and Bendis co-wrote the first arc with artist Adam Kubert. The first arc is pretty strong and is heavily focused on Reed Richards, his upbringing, and interest in physics. Reed is kind of the main character of the whole series. In this version, Ben and Reed were childhood friends, not college roommates like the original comics. Ben was there when Reed discovered the negative zone in his garage. He isn't a pilot, but shows up to the negative zone test to support Reed. In this universe, Victor sabotages the experiment by changing the coordinates, claiming he was fixing Reed's work. This run is not rooted in the space race, so exploring another dimension is their way of modernizing the story. At first, Ultimate FF feels less like a superhero comic and more like a sci-fi exploration story. The superhero themes only kick in later on. They don't even get the FF name or logo until issue 21. Sue Storm is a biologist in the Baxter Building, so she and Reed bond through their areas of expertise. The FF becomes a way for Reed and Sue to do more experiments while Ben and Johnny tag along. Johnny and Sue's father, Franklin Storm, plays a major role as the head of the Baxter Building. He serves as a mentor to Reed, encouraging his intellect, but also keeping him tethered to reality. Franklin tries to make sure the military doesn't arrest and experiment on the FF. This is one of the first FF runs that actually tries to explain the science of their powers instead of crediting everything to cosmic rays. Ultimate FF initially leans into body horror for the powers. Unlike the 60s origin, Ben has the most nonchalant transformation. When the FF get their powers, the run switches from an optimistic tone to one of panic. Doctor Doom arguably gets the biggest change from his original counterpart. First off, this one is Victor Van Dam, not Von Doom. Also, instead of being a master of science and magic, this Doom's entire body changes to an insectoid look. He's not wearing armor anymore, that's just what he looks like now. Yes, he also does have poison breath. He's a skilled engineer who builds weapons and has this weird tattoo gun that can mind control people. This is probably the most shallow Doctor Doom depiction. The Ultimate Comics have some cool remixes of these stories, but Doom gets the short end of the stick. Everything that makes that character who he is taken away. From losing his family, to working his way up to taking over Latveria, it's all gone. Now he's some rich guy who is a descendant of Vlad the Impaler, and is crazy and evil for the sake of it. Outside of vaguely looking like Doom, he's more like the terrible Tinkerer, building gadgets and screaming monologues. Phineas Mason is even mentioned in this run, and the alien bug-like design fits into his backstory hinted by Steve Ditko. Later in the run, Greg Land lazily drew Doom like the normal version, ignoring the Immonen design. No more hooves. Victor gets sent to a zombie universe, but villains like Mad Thinker and Thanos have either bigger or more memorable roles in the series. When Millar returns to the book for issues 21 through 32, he's paired with Greg Land. What is there to say that hasn't been said about Land's output? Land's pages don't really have fight scenes. There's very little sequential storytelling. It's mostly static poses, and the pages feel more like snapshots. There are some zombie scenes that actually look like he put effort into them. The most obvious example of his Landisms is when Sue or her mother appear on a page, because it looks like it was traced from porn. Each run kind of has its own flavor. The first arc with Bendis, Millar, and Kuber is a strong start to the series and is more optimistic, where Immonen and Ellis's run leans hard into explaining the science of everything. Dave Stewart is the colorist for the first 18 issues. I'm also mentioning him because I haven't forgotten about the BPRD series I started. Millar returns for an early 2000s edgefest that has time-traveling Skrulls, the worst depiction of Namor, and the random inclusion of Alicia Masters who barely appears in the series. Each arc is more of a test of Reed's optimism. When he makes contact with another universe, Reed thinks he found someone who looks like classic Reed Richards. The twist is admittedly clever, teasing a crossover between Ultimate and main universe Reed. It turns out to be much worse. The zombie FF turns out to be this universe's Frightful Four, one of the major events in a long list of disappointments for Reed. Namor in this series needs to be launched into the sun. Mike Carey's run leans into the more cosmic elements of the FF. He's teamed up with artist Pascal Ferry, and they become the main team for most of this run. While they don't try to explain the science, they try to lean into 60s and 70s cosmic storytelling, bringing in Silver Surfer, Psycho Man, and using Thanos as the main villain of the series. Carey does have a strong two-part arc with Jay Lee, where the FF go up against a new take on the Mad Thinker named Rona Burchill. She was rejected from the Baxter Building on the same day Reed was brought in. It's actually an eerie reinterpretation, which ends with her beating the FF. She doesn't appear again in this series. The artwork starts off strong, with Kuber and Immonen. Ferry shows up with a funky modern style that works for an Ultimate title. Mark Brooks shows up for a Red Ghost story where the FF team up with Crimson Dynamo. His style probably feels closest to classic FF until all of Red Ghost's animals merge together. In Carey's run, Silver Surfer serves Psycho Man, a being who brainwashes people to worship him. He's like a cult leader. Galactus doesn't even appear in the FF series. Certain reinterpretations like Annihilus, Mad Thinker, or Red Ghost feel fresh. Then things get convoluted, like with Thanos showing up and demanding that Reed creates a cosmic cube only to vaporize himself with it. Carey leaves near the end of the series, and the artists start rapidly changing. Some top cow artists take over, and sometimes there are 3 inkers per issue, like they were really trying to get these books out on time. The run does fall apart near the end. They follow up Thanos with Agatha Harkness and the Salem 7 and a cliffhanger ending. It's frustrating, especially with superhero comics, when readers want to read one title, and now they have to check out an underwhelming edgy crossover to get the ending. Ultimate FF doesn't actually have much of an ending in the main series. The real ending happens in a one-shot called Requiem that breaks the Fantastic Four apart. After the dreadful, edgy Ultimatum crossover, Sue rejects Reed's proposal, Ben ends up joining S.H.I.E.L.D., Johnny leaves the country, leaving Reed to move back home where everything started. Also, Reed proposed to Sue during Franklin Storm's funeral. Ultimate FF can be read as the maker's origin. There's a 4-issue series called Ultimate Doom written by Brian Bendis with art by Rafa Sandoval. It leans into Reed's descent into madness. He's already wearing the Maker helmet and almost wipes out Sue for rejecting his proposal. Johnny ends up burning Reed's face as all the edgy Ultimates gang up on him, ending with Reed being knocked into the negative zone. Ultimate Fallout number 4 sees Reed surviving the negative zone and fully embracing his role as the Maker. By the time he reappears in Jonathan Hickman's Ultimates run, he has his own army, he's torturing Thor and teaming up with the Hulk, and does a bunch of other terrible stuff. So this character ended up becoming this character. After the main series and Ultimate Doom by Bendis, Hickman kind of adopts the Maker as his own character. It's the loud, clunky, and disjointed way that mainstream comics sometimes are that led to the introduction of a major villain. According to Hickman, he wasn't even a big fan of FF before getting the job. He ended up doing his homework and put together a run that took a bit from every era of the FF. The FF Dark Reign series is his first run with those characters, but outside of the first appearance of the Council of Reeds, it's not required to understand this run. His actual run starts with FF 570 with artist Dale Eaglesham, colorist Paul Mounts, and letterer Russ Wooten. Visually, this run is heavily rooted in Jack Kirby's style, from the way the characters are drawn to the use of Kirby Crackle and exploring cosmic concepts. It pulls from other runs like Kirby and Lee and Byrne. There are influences from modern runs, like Reed's plan to solve everything from McDuffie and Pelletier's stories, with heavy influences from the Millar and Hitch run, especially with the use of the New Defenders, Crispy Galactus, and New World. The artists for the main FF series include Dale Eaglesham, Steve Epting, and Nick Dragotta. Even though Hickman is known for all these Marvel stories, he has his own books as well.
Well, no one retires at Marvel or DC, and so it's really dumb not to own your own stuff. And the reason why I keep doing my own stuff and image books and whatnot is I don't want to be a sad story of a guy who thought he was going to get to write Silver Surfer for 30 years or something like that. It breaks my heart when I hear those stories, but nowadays there isn't really much of an excuse. We know all the bad stories.
This run moves a small army of supporting characters into the Baxter Building and gives them all page time. Like Franklin Richards' friends, Leech and Artie, a clone son of the wizard named Bentley 23 plays a role. There's Alex Power from Power Pack and Dragon Man. Franklin's first meeting with Power Pack goes back to the 80s when he met them in a dream. The Moloids Turg, Mick, Kor, and Tong play a big role in the series. Ben saved them from the High Evolutionary City, so they nickname him The Ben as a form of respect. Big cosmic insanity mixed with the family dynamics with a heavy focus on Franklin and Valeria. Even though the cast is bigger than it's ever been, everyone gets their time to shine. Hickman is adept at balancing a massive cast but not overcrowding the story. Reed doesn't try to work alone anymore. He's no longer the main figure pushing the plot. Instead, he starts the Future Foundation to teach the next generation of great minds to help the world. There's the Council of Reeds, which features Reeds from alternate universes. While Reed is one of the greatest minds in the main universe, he feels out of his league with some of the main council members. Especially with the main three, each possessing an Infinity Gauntlet while traversing different universes capturing Dr. Dooms. Reed's relationship with his father Nathaniel gets a lot of emphasis in this run. Even going back to the 90s story, Sue still doesn't fully trust Nathaniel. Fatherhood plays a major role overall. The run opens with a flashback of Nathaniel telling Reed that being afraid to fail is unacceptable and that he needs to try. Even though Nathaniel vanishes from Reed's life to go on his own adventures, this advice informs the way Reed raises Franklin and Valeria. Although, Reed and Sue do better than Nathaniel did. Even the villains get moments like this, like how the Wizard is a foil to Reed. Each FF run that uses the Wizard seems to have this goal of how can writers and artists make him worse. Bentley 23 was only given a number by the Wizard. He ends up going by just Bentley, becoming a better one than his father. It gets recommended often, but Hickman's run might not be the best place for new readers to start, at first. He pulls from almost every character in FF's history, but as people go through this run, they'll get a crash course on each character. Rereading this run, it doesn't feel controversial. It's actually kind of a crowd pleaser, pulling from the best hits of each decade, but injecting a human element into it that was missing in some stories. It's heavy on the epic cosmic moments, but it ramps up the family aspect and fleshes out the lesser known characters. This run also finally reunites Ben Grimm and Alicia Masters, and they haven't really been together since the 80s. There's another plot where Norrin Radd is serving Big G again, who wants revenge on Malar and Hitch for frying that other Galactus. Galactus and Reed are still allies going back to the Byrne run because the Planet Eater doesn't want to consume Earth. He's willing to find an alternative by consuming New World. Sue Storm has her own storyline as ambassador for mankind to Atlantis during some peace negotiations. Emma Frost and Scott Summers represent the mutants. Namor attacks the Old Kings of Atlantis because he's Namor. The Old Kings pick Sue as their new leader, and she ends up humbling Bill Everett's son. In issue 587, the army of Annihilus, the Annihilation Wave, tries to invade the Baxter Building. Galactus also ends up consuming New World to prepare for a bigger conflict that happens later. This is the part where Hickman clears the board after using other ones as inspiration so he can go in his own direction. In the Negative Zone, Johnny, Franklin, Valeria, and a human Ben fight the invasion. Before they get overwhelmed, Johnny pushes Ben through the Negative Zone portal in one of the hardest hitting moments of the series. Johnny sacrifices himself and makes his final stand in the Negative Zone. A high point of this series is in issue 588 when artist Nick Dragotta jumps on. Johnny's headshot is removed from the cover. This issue is mostly silent, showing the characters in mourning. Reed is going to use the nullifier on Annihilus, but decides not to. Even Doom goes to Johnny's funeral. At the Baxter Building, Valeria wants revenge. It's followed by a Mark Brookstron story with Spider-Man and Franklin. Dragotta's Reed and art style in general is so strongly rooted in Kirby. Scenes like Johnny's sacrifice and the way he planned for it show the heart he brings to the story. He makes two big requests in a hologram to Reed: bring on Spider-Man to replace him, and to keep making the world better. During the Future Foundation run, the main artists are Steve Epting, Juan Bobillo, and Nick Dragotta with some guest pencilers. Future Foundation brings Spidey onto the team as requested by Johnny. Amazing Spider-Man number 657 has a pretty heartfelt scene written by Dan Slott with art by Marcos Martin that shows why Johnny picked Peter as his replacement. It's not required reading to understand Future Foundation, but it's worth the price of admission. Once again, Sue designs the new Future Foundation costumes. Also, someone else joins the team, to Reed's horror. Doom joins because Valeria promised she would help fix the brain damage he got in the Malar and Hitch run. Since he's an egotistical bastard, he agrees to join. Being who he is, Doom blames Ben for not saving Johnny. The main Fantastic Four book came back near the end of 2011 with issue 600, featuring all the heroes fighting a Kree invasion and the forces of the Negative Zone led by Johnny. So, the torch was gone for about 30 seconds in this essay, but gone for a few months in the comics. Johnny did end up dying, but was brought back to life and experimented on by Annihilus. The Torch ends up teaming up with an Inhumans group called the Light Brigade, overthrowing Annihilus and stealing the Cosmic Control Rod. The early 600s arc with the Kree, Annihilation Wave, and Mad Celestial Invasion is the cosmic payoff of the Hickman run. Future Foundation number 13 to 14 is one of the high points of the series. The Future Foundation, Nathaniel Richards, Dr. Doom, Christoph Vernard, and the Alpha Reed Richards take on Mad Celestials. After Doom calls the Alpha Reed Richards a pale imitation of the main one, this one gets vaporized by Celestials before he gets to use the ultimate nullifier. What separates the main Reed from the other council members is how he isn't willing to sacrifice his family to solve everything. Throughout the run, it's the FF and the Future Foundation working together to save everyone from disaster. Doom ends up sacrificing himself to fight the Celestials, making a promise to Valeria to stay alive. By this point, Victor's mind is fully recovered, so this is peak Doom stepping up to the Celestials in one of the most memorable moments from this run. Heavy on the ego, heavy on the honor, all hope lies in Doom. While he doesn't stop the Celestials, Doom is able to delay them for the two big guns. The Celestials show up on Earth, take down Galactus, but Franklin and Valeria from the future show up to save the day. Future and current Franklin combine their powers for a moment that still doesn't feel old after a reread. Franklin resurrecting Galactus as his herald to fight the Celestials. This run follows the trend of humanizing Galactus with a conversation between Galen and Franklin in space after the fight. After the Kree Negative Zone Celestial story, the rest of Hickman's time on the FF books is filled with small and thoughtful character building moments and tying up loose ends. T'Challa becomes King of the Dead, the Foundation gets another member with Onome, and Bentley spends some quality time with his father. Fantastic Four 605 shows a future where Reed solves everything. Back in Fantastic Four 584, the Future Foundation members made a serum to turn Ben back to normal for a week every year. Due to his rock state, Ben ages slowly and outlives the main FF. However, he forms a new team with Franklin and carries on the First Family's memory. Hickman's time with the First Family comes to an end with Future Foundation number 23 from 2012. Dragotta and Hickman have a heartfelt send-off of adult Franklin and Valeria saying goodbye to everyone, which is nice that a run as big as this ends its story in a subtle way. After Fantastic Four, Hickman went over to the Avengers. In late 2012, writer Matt Fraction took over two FF titles, the main one with artist Mark Bagley and a Future Foundation-centric spin-off with Mike Allred. This is another era where Marvel ditches legacy numbering. The main run starts with a dinosaur chewing on Reed's arm like jerky. This leads to a discovery that Reed's body is breaking down on a molecular level, and the same is happening to the rest of the four. Reed decides to find a new team to replace them before taking the FF on a trip through different universes for a cure. A cool part about the Allred book is how each replacement member is pulled from a different decade of FF. They bring in Medusa, who joined in the 70s, She-Hulk from the 80s Byrne run, Scott Lang Ant-Man from the 90s DeFalco and Ryan run is picked as the team's leader. Johnny Storm's pop star love interest Darla Deering being the newest created character, taking on the role of Miss Thing. Not to be mistaken with Sharon Ventura, who shows up again in the next run. Reed kind of pushes Scott into leading the new FF to help him deal with the grief of losing his daughter Cassie. Lang is smart, but he's not like Reed, so it adds an extra layer of drama having a leader who doesn't have all the answers. The new team was only supposed to exist while the FF were gone for 4 minutes, but plans changed. Everyone has a reason to be there, even Darla. Even though Johnny picked her last minute, she becomes an important member of the team. It's a fun lineup that shines a light on lesser-known characters and breaks up the monotony of mainstream comics. Silver Age energy that leans into the attention-grabbing gimmick covers of the time. In the main run, Reed's family doesn't appreciate him hiding the sickness from them. This run has some fun moments with the main family and focuses on building up Reed and Sue's relationship. Early on, Ben has some run-ins with the Yancey Street gang, and there's even a casual Moon Boy and Devil Dinosaur cameo. One of the pieces that combines both books is the mystery of an old man Johnny Storm. Both teams wonder if he's an imposter or from the future, where the actual reveal is that he's from an alternate universe who lost his FF to a mashup of Doctor Doom, Kang, and Annihilus. Also, this design looks like Mike Allred's Madman, and that is not a complaint. The run with Allred is a funky, heartfelt love letter to the FF and some of the weirder parts of their history. It's a thoughtful run that shows Fraction's versatility with different tones and Allred's enthusiasm for the characters. The Moloids start worshipping She-Hulk now, calling her the Gen. In general, the Foundation gets a lot of love in the Allred series, especially Turg, Mick, Kor, and Tong. Bentley is trying to do good while still scheming and causing trouble. All of the new FF members take turns teaching the Foundation students. Whenever Ben or Dr. Doom appear, there's a heavy Joe Sinnott energy in Allred's inking. Bagley's art in his stories is solid. Carl Kiesel returns to script some of the later issues too. Fraction saved the heavy lifting for the book with Allred. They're ideal collaborators because they bring a zany energy but mix it with thoughtful moments while exploring existential themes. This run gives the FF an underdog quality and focuses on some of the characters who don't get as much page time as they should. At first glance, it's a little funky. It looks like it could be a gimmicky cash grab, but it's told in an authentic way and is a solid fun take for new and old readers, and deserves another look. Writer James Robinson took over in 2014 with a new #1, teaming up with artist Leonard Kirk, colorist Jesus Abertov, and letterer Clayton Cowles. FF mainstay Carl Kiesel returns to ink the series after scripting some stories in the last run. This is kind of the bleak era for the FF, mostly because movie rights were tied into it, which is one of the worst parts about modern mainstream comics. The thing that inspired these movies is now controlled by them. Marvel didn't want to support any Fox FF movies, so it cancelled the series with issue 645 in 2015. Kirk and Kiesel's pencils and inks bring a fluid look to the world, and the new blue costume designs stick around for another big event. Certain characters like Sharon Ventura finally return to the series, and there's a sick callback to the Marvel 2-in-1 issue where Ben befriends Sandman, who turns over a new leaf after a life of crime. It's a shame that this team was trying to tell a story while the book was shelved over a movie that destroys brain cells. Luckily, the FF weren't out of the game completely and came back for a major event. Hickman's stories all tie together. Not that they need to be required reading, but they add to the context of Secret Wars 2015 with artist Asad Rabich. It might not be the best idea to go into this story blind. This event is years of build-up from FF, the Ultimates, and Avengers, with Dr. Doom once again attaining godhood. Doom uses Molecule Man's powers because he sees himself as the best person to save the different universes from blowing up. He ends up stitching the different universes together and ruling over the new battle world while keeping Molecule Man imprisoned. A difference between this story and the original Secret Wars is that when Doom becomes a god, he won't or can't fix his own face. A few main players get trapped on a life raft in stasis, including Peter Parker, Reed Richards, and Black Panther, who remember what everything was like before Doom took over. Miles Morales plays a big role, and both spiders add some levity to an otherwise serious story. There's a group of villains and anti-heroes like Thanos, Namor, and the Maker who want to overthrow Doom. Doctor Strange is in the middle trying to help the heroes while keeping Doom at bay. Doom snuffing Strange because of this causes some of his supporters to turn against him. Not that I'm selling it, but it's one of the few events that feels earned. The art by Rabich with covers by Alex Ross, two heavy hitters, doesn't hurt either. It's not about Reed meeting the Maker, or T'Challa ruling the dead while wearing an Infinity Gauntlet, this army of Hulks going after Doom, a Rock'em Sock'em fight between the Thing and Galactus, or this scene everyone knows between Doom and Thanos. All these characters appear, but it's a story about Reed and Doom leading to their final fight. In the middle of this is Owen Reese, or Molecule Man, who has the power to fix everything. Throughout FF's history, he's been a consistently well-written character, a god who wants to be normal. During their fight, Doom admits that Reed is the best person to have control over Molecule Man's powers. There's a white flash, and later we see Reed, Owen, and Franklin restoring universes. It's shown how Reed healed Doom's face, causing Victor to turn over a new leaf. Another powerful part about Secret Wars is how it gives an ending to Doom and the FF. In a space like mainstream comics that's filled with cyclical storytelling, Secret Wars is a pretty strong ending for these characters, seeing as the main book was cancelled anyway. In the end, Reed and Sue decide to drop out of the superhero game, travel around with the Future Foundation, and raise Franklin and Valeria. Johnny and Ben didn't have an FF book to hang out in for years. Ben ended up joining the Guardians of the Galaxy, while Johnny wound up with the Inhumans. Marvel tried to drum up interest in the first family again in 2017. Writer Chip Zdarsky helmed a new version of Marvel 2-in-1 with The Thing and Human Torch. Zdarsky teamed up with artists like Jim Chung, Valerio Schitti, Ramon Perez, and Declan Shalvey to tease the return of the FF. It's not an official FF series, but it's a strong character building story, so I'm counting it. In 2018, Marvel made a pretty big show of the first family's return to comics, complete with a countdown that revealed a silhouette of the four. Writer Dan Slott left his long run on Spider-Man to take over the book, with artist Sarah Pacelli designing the world and doing the art for the early issues. Slott wastes no time using his first arc to marry Ben and Alicia. He's working with an army of artists during this run. Even though Slott makes changes here and there, retconning things like the origin of the cosmic rays, it's clear over the 46 issues of this run who Slott's favorite character is. Ben, the idol of millions, gets a lot of page time in these stories. Whether it's the wedding, a bloody throwdown with the Hulk, or finally starting a family of his own with Alicia, Ben is the strongest part of this run. Mainstream comics can be hard for new readers to get into, but it's been pretty cool seeing new readers jump onto the recent run by Ryan North from 2022. At the end of the first issue, North talks about how, quote, "This is a comic for people who have read every Fantastic Four appearance since 1961, but it's also one that welcomes people who have never read a single Fantastic Four comic before," unquote. It's not a run that demands readers know every story. The early arcs start off with a mystery and show why the FF are relevant. So everyone starts with a blank slate. Also, they got Alex Ross to paint a cover of Doctor Doom, writing a Doctor Doom T-Rex, and that's pretty rad. Hopefully, it gets new readers checking out the FF or comics in general.